Hi, Serena. It's Vicky here.
Hi, Vicky. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Sorry, you
Did
can't
you
see
get
my
Hannah's
face.
message? Oh, sorry. That's okay. I was just. Oh, hi. You're all right.
Hi.
Good. Thank you for having me. Did you get Hannah's message that she's going to go follow straight on? Brilliant.
Yes, she's gonna go straight after you, and then we'll have a break, which I actually think might be better because they'll probably need a break further into the session.
Yep, that sounds great.
Okay, I'm just going to practice sharing stuff in case I need to do it.
Yeah.
I've got all your presentations uploaded into Teams, but I just want to check that I know what I'm doing in case it's required.
Sure, and I'll just have a fiddle as well.
Okay.
Hi, Giordani.
Now, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Thank you for doing this.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. No, thanks for
Yeah.
organising it. It's a great thing to do.
Yeah, it's good. Very good. And I think they like your topic. I don't know if it's because of you or because this is the area where they don't know a lot.
It's fine. It's fine. They are. I'm happy to. That's not what I'm getting from the GPs though. They're very good with ADHD, ASD. That's one of the things I'm going to say. They're super good. So, but what I'll do is I'll blather on, and then I'll leave time for questions. And you know that Hannah swapped with the break.
Hannah swapped. Okay.
So
that's
she's
fine.
she's gonna carry on. She's gonna go on straight. Vicky knows she's gonna go straight on from me. So and then the break will come after Hannah.
Okay, that's fine. That should be okay.
She's got to take her son to the GP. So ironically, coincidentally.
That's all right. So let's see how many we get today.
Hi, Giordano.
Hello.
How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, more people. We're getting more people. That's good.
We've got more than 30 RSVPs, which is good, and a lot of them don't RSVP, so
okay.
It's really good news. I am just trying to work out how to share.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Vicky, my sharing seems to work, so that's one less one to worry about, I think.
Okay, brilliant. What do you click on to share? I've done it before, but never on my laptop.
It's just for me, because
Yes.
everybody sees something slightly different. Top of the screen, next to the leave button, slightly perilously, there's a button that says share, and then it gives you lots of options of what you can share, and then you just choose the thing that thing. Thank you very much.
Amazing, thank you.
It's all right, no worries.
Let's stick it on the floor.
Just to say hello to everybody who's here so far. We're just going to let a few more people join the event, and then we will get started.
Right. Shall we then start?
Yes, Giordano, that's fine. I'll just do a little introduction to the people that are in so far. So hello, everybody. Thank you very much for making time to join us this afternoon for our St. George's Paediatric Half Day webinar. I was very pleased to see so many people have RSVP'd to attend, so that's wonderful. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We will, of course, be recording the session as usual for our GP colleagues who aren't able to attend and would like to watch it back. Secondly, please do keep your microphones and your cameras off as much as possible because there will be a lot of people in the meeting, so it would be very helpful. Thirdly, we do a feedback questionnaire after every event that I'll send out to everybody. It would be really wonderful if you could fill it in for our consultants to have some feedback and also for us to plan future sessions and their agendas. So thanks so much to our paediatric team for also making themselves available this Friday afternoon. And I'll hand over to you. If you need anything, I'll be silently in the background so you can ask for help. And however you want to field questions as well, just let me know and I can help with that. Over to you, Giordano.
Serena, the floor is yours. I think I will let people present themselves.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Can I be heard? That's a good start. Donnie, can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Fantastic. I'll get cracking. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And just a quick bit of housekeeping for your timetable. You have a break after me, but that's actually changed. Hannah is going to follow on straight after, and there will be a break after Hannah. So just hang on, don't go on your break, straight after me. I'm Serena Hayward, developmental paediatrician. I'm ADHD lead. Some of you may also know me as one of the medical examiners, so we kind of talk every now and again when community deaths come in. But we're going to focus on ADHD and ASD. I'm repping ASD through Pani Hudson. She sent me a few slides, and I will do my best to do those justice. So I have some slides here. Just bear with one moment. Here we go, window. Where are we? As soon as I have it all set up, it all goes wrong, doesn't it? Here we go. Well, I'll just kind of chat as I'm going. ADHD, I'm going to take some questions at the end, if that's okay. Although, of course, I'm very used to chaos in my clinics, but I'll leave the questions to the end. Here we go. Let's just do it this way. Amazing. I set this all up hours ago. And then, of course, thank you, Windows. So here we go. Let's get this one going. Here we go. Lovely. If you can't see that, holler. I'm going to presume that's all working okay. All right. So first of all, thank you. A big thank you to everybody. You've been absolutely amazing during this ADHD medication supply issue. It's been massive. I'll come to a little bit more about that, but you've received letters from our service giving some information on what to do. And just to make it clear, before we kind of carry on the whole way through, at any stage, just send the patient straight to me or any questions straight to me. And I know that everybody emails me for those who I do shared care with. I'm very, very grateful. But if you and your pharmacist do want to make the changes that I've made a recommendation for, I'm super grateful. So what we're going to do today, a little bit of a catch up about ADHD. Last time I spoke, I did a lot more about the neurobiology and the diagnosis, so I'm not going to dwell on that today. And I think just thinking about the next talk, I want to talk about adolescence. But today I just want to give you a catch up because there's a lot going on with ADHD at the moment. You cannot miss ADHD; it's everywhere at the moment. So I'm going to talk about the epidemiology of children, but kind of blend into a little bit with adults. I'm going to talk about SEND and what's happening with EHCPs in relation to concentration difficulties and autism. And I've called that the delayed explosion. There's an awful lot going down with that at the moment as well. Our services in ADHD and ASD, who to refer to and how we reach a diagnosis and why that can take quite a long time and how frustrating that can feel and how that can feel to our families and how they then come to you to say, why is a diagnosis not happening? I'll explain why. What happens with girls.
Sorry, Serena, to interrupt you. Your screen is just showing, we can still see your emails and the attachment. It's not showing full screen.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I don't know why that's not working then. It just says stop sharing. Hang on a second. You should have my presentation. Okay, let me try. I suspect I know what's happening. If I go back into Teams and share window. Can you see that now? Is that coming through?
I can see that now. Hopefully everybody else can too. Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Nalini. We can see.
Lovely. So just a list of what we're doing. Okay, and then we got to the service plans, and I've said don't mention transition, but of course we'll talk about transition, medication supply, autism from my colleague Pani, and then questions. Okay, so as my teenage sons would say, what is even happening with ADHD at the moment? You cannot avoid it. It's everywhere. It's in the newspapers, celebrities are talking about it all of the time, people being diagnosed. I'm sure you are totally inundated with adults and young people and adults wanting their diagnosis. And I've got a picture of Grayson Perry, artist, and his wife Philippa Perry, who got herself into a bit of a tangle on social media recently, saying something a little bit rapid about how ADHD is a sort of diagnosis du jour, and it's been rather overblown, and then had to backpedal furiously as people bombarded her with saying it is a real condition, I have it, my life has been changed. But she made a very good point that it shouldn't be an identity, it shouldn't be a self-diagnosis. We are more than our diagnoses, and she's a therapist, so she thinks about it in that way. But to say that people do find their identity in many ways through ADD, it is a diagnostic process, and there have of course been shock horror documentaries of children going to have a diagnosis when very little was done. So I'm going to take you through what we do in kind of a gallop through, just so I hopefully can be reassured that there is a process. So we have a prevalence worldwide of approximately 5%. Our Wandsworth child population is estimated to be 67,000. So there should be just under 3,400 children. Now, at the moment, our current service load is just under 2,000 children, which is quite a hefty service. I suspect we're probably one of the biggest services with regular follow-ups within our trust. So the rest of the children are still out there, or they may be managed by CAMS, and I'll explain why CAMS are seeing some of the children. So we should be seeing 11 new children a week as part of our service, and we triage 546 new referrals, and they're coming in from yourselves, from health visitors, and from some other services, particularly within paediatrics. So there's still quite a few out there. And so what's happening in terms of ADHD is we're catching up. I think there are still children to see. This has been an 11-year project for me so far, is to try and catch up with all of the children in Wandsworth if we can. And it's thanks to you that we are doing that. But it does feel like a little bit of a flurry. I think the same happened with autism a few years back. And things have slowed down in terms of autism referrals just a little. It's still hefty, but it's nothing like the ADHD referrals we're seeing within children, and I know we're seeing that with adults as well. So there's a lot of people are finally realising that the issue that they had is something significant, which is why they're coming to you, having had their condition missed when they were children, because these are young people who are growing up, Generation X and beyond, who were told that they were silly, slow, class clowns, stupid, and partly because they realised, looking at their children's diagnosis, that they themselves have this issue. But there are going to be, of course, adults who are going to see celebrities. We do hear oh, I'm a little bit autistic, oh, I'm a little bit ADHD, and so they do need a proper assessment. So meanwhile, we have an explosion in children needing to have education and healthcare plans, or at least applying. I've included a slide of a slightly mean-spirited Twitter. Somebody saying there are some cases of genuine need, but many are responding to incentives when the HCP is a golden ticket. So there's a reasonable amount of pressure that the families feel that they come up against when they're applying for the HCP. The HCP process is being monitored at the moment, and there's going to be a review on how the processes actually take place. But there's been an increase in about 73% of the HCP plans in the last 4 years. That represents just under 3% of residents in the child population. And that's going to set to grow. So I think what I'm going to try and do, and sorry, just to say that a proportion of those are ADHD, ASD. I don't know the proportion. I did ask. I was unable to find that, but there are a fair chunk of those. Just two things I want you to take away from this is, just because because you have ADHD does not mean that you get an education and healthcare plan. Now, that's a misconception of a number of our families, and they come and say, well, if I get my diagnosis, then I'll get my EHCP, and that's where some of the pressure is coming to you. They must be seen, they must get their EHCP. That's not the case. It should be needs driven. Of course, we live in the real world, and pragmatically, if you have a diagnosis, that does help move things forward. But what I would do, and this is what I do, is families are saying the schools aren't listening, I can't get any progress getting my EHCP underway, direct them to the Wandsworth Information Advice and Support Service, WIAS, or Parent Partnership, or IPSI, or the Council for Disabled Children, and they support and guide parents in advocating for them in communication with the local authority and schools. That will take a lot of pressure off you, and it certainly does with us, to help parents navigate what can be quite a dispiriting and difficult process. But this is just a little aside. For those who don't get their EHCP, a number appeal, and I have some figures here for you of the number who've appealed. So in 2022, for primary school, it's 28, two-stage appeals, there were 2, secondary school, 89, and approximately 6.5% of those get their EHCP on appeal. So again, with families who may feel that they've reached the end of the road the first time, I will say, if you can bear it, it is worth appealing. I've got a slide now here with our process. I've blurred the flow diagram, but I can send that to you, but you should have that there. I just don't want you to feel that you have to read it. But just to give you a recap, and I know you're all fantastic at this, but just a small reminder that in ADHD services, they have to have a Wandsworth GP or an address in Wandsworth for me to see. So what's been happening is you may have noticed that we have quite a few children from other boroughs with Wandsworth GPs who want to have ADHD referrals. So I have noticed, I haven't audited it. Merton, I'm looking at you. We have lots of Merton families who hop over the borough, over the border, get themselves a Wandsworth GP, get themselves an ADHD referral. ASD is slightly different. They have to have a Wandsworth address as well. So we will suggest, if you have an under 5, that you refer them to the developmental service through the single pathway. And for those with behavioural difficulties, consider health visitors, CAMS for under 5 behavioural, and early help through MASH. We will see anybody rising 5, so that's 4.5 upwards, and for a new referral up to 11, they come to us. All the over 11s go to CAMS, except for ASD and those over 8s, and I know that's always a bit of an annoying thing to remember. The ICB are looking at our referral pathways at the moment, so that things may change. But we will see anybody up to the age of 18 if they've got learning needs, if they've got significant physical or medical issues. But once they're in the service, we see them till they're 18. So sometimes we get re-referrals back in from the GP saying this child has been seen, whether they're going to be seen again, they've been discharged. It's very unlikely that I'm going to discharge them before they're 18. That's why we've got almost 2,000 children in the service. We follow NICE guidelines, and they are to have reviews. We do most of that with shared care with you, of course, with height, weight and blood pressures regularly for those who are on medication. But I like to touch base with them. I do telephone clinics. I speak to our families every 6 months to a year. Some of them want a little bit longer than that. And particularly as they're getting towards 18, I bring them in for an adolescent review. I do a heads assessment. You're going to hear a little bit more about that in the mental health section that Charlie is going to do with you, I'm sure, looking at the influence of social media. We call it sex, drugs, rock and roll, which is very uncool. And I see the children separate from their families, because ADHD children are highly vulnerable. In American prisons, there's approximately 45% of the population in prisons have got ADHD, some of which was undiagnosed. So we know that there's a high risk of some of our children running into conduct problems and youth offending. So for when, and I haven't done the research on this, but I know Pani has in her slides later, you are exceptionally good at referring. I don't need long referral letters, so please, I know you're extremely busy. You can literally say to me, I'm very concerned this child may have ADHD, or the parents are concerned they have ADHD. There's no safeguarding concerns that I've found, other than the notes that you already write. And I'm really happy to see your in-clinic notes. You don't have to send me a very long, complex letter. I see that as my job. I see you as busy enough as it is. But of course, you'll be thinking about safeguarding and giving some general child, parent and child mental health advice, and and consider whether they need to have some further support for mental health at that stage. Okay. So before the diagnostic review, we do the early intervention clinic. We're on an 18-week pathway for that, which we've busted. So we've got a team of CNSs desperately trying to catch up with that at the moment. But we should be able, we're not doing too bad, we're about 60% now. So we should be able to speak to the families within 18 weeks. Now, this is an active process. It's a phone clinic, but we take any child that we are concerned about to our multidisciplinary meeting, which we hold every week. So that's important for out-of-borough prescription. So a child comes to you from, say, Lambeth or Lincolnshire. They've had their assessment, they're on medication. You can refer them through to me, through to triage. We will talk about them in the NDT, and I will do an emergency prescription for them. Because as long as they've had a recent review by their referral team, obviously we need to make sure that they have had a medical review to make sure they're safe to have medication. I will often send them off to get a height, weight and blood pressure again for prescribing safety, but I will say this is an emergency prescription so that they know that they're part of the service. Once they're part of our pathway, they are part of the service, and we let people know our email address. Sometimes they will say, when am I going to be seen? We won't get any specific advice until we've seen them, and they can email us directly. So you'll see the letters that come through. They have lots of QR codes on them that will come through for you if you want to click on these. These are things like send in mind, send talk, and some local advice. What we say to the families is while you're waiting to be seen, once you've been seen, once you're waiting for follow-up, just keep in touch with us. We have an open access service for office hours at all time. So I've got the sign here from Cafe Italia, Bar Italia, apologies, which has late opening hours for any Soho people, misspent youth. Paediatric development secretaries at stgeorges.nhs.uk and send them to us. So again, if you see a family, they say, nobody's seeing me, they're doing nothing, etc. Remind them that they can email us directly. They don't have to wait. They will get a reply from us usually within 48 hours. They really don't have to worry. So quick run through diagnostic review and labels. Just really very briefly, as you're very aware, ADHD is a tripart. What do I forget now? ADHD. I say inattention and impulsivity, I get muddled up. Okay, so it's the triad of impulsivity, inattentiveness, and hyperactivity. There are two schools of thought where the ADD, which doesn't have the hyperactivity, impulsivity is a separate condition. Pragmatically, it's all part of the same condition. Some families feel very, very wedded to the ADD diagnosis, much as some families are very wedded to Asperger's as opposed to high functioning autism spectrum disorder. I don't mind writing ADD on the letter, but it's essentially the same. So if you're concerned about any of those three things, you absolutely can send them in. If I think there's something else going on, I'll send them off into different directions, either development or ASD. But it has to be pervasive. It has to be more than 6 months. So we contact the schools, and in our EIC clinic, we get consent, and that's really important so that we can get updates from the school. And schools are very used to us asking for updates. And we have a questionnaire that they fill in, which includes the ADHD rating scale, which we use as a way of kind of marking time about their progress. We do a face-to-face review is crucial, but we won't delay if we have to get factor gathering by phone. So some of our families, as you know, are a little bit chaotic. Timekeeping can be a real issue. So if they're running 15 minutes late into a clinic, I'll give them a call and they'll say, oh, I'm stuck in traffic. I'll do as much as I can by telephone and get them into a follow-up clinic. So as I said, we use the DSM-5 criteria, we use SNAP, we sometimes use Connors. I want to use more of those. We do narrative from schools because sometimes schools aren't completely on it when it comes to describing their difficulties, and sometimes we do have to bat them back. I'll come back to that in a moment. And I observe them in clinic, and it's very important I take a history from the children, and the children have got a pretty good idea about their concentration. I always ask them to score their concentration out of 0 to 10, even the quite young ones, they'll tell me. And consent is obviously crucial for information sharing, particularly with our looked after children. Now, what you'll see on our letters sometimes is a working diagnosis, and that's what I say to the family is as near as damn it to a diagnosis, but we're missing some data. And that might be an up-to-date school report. If they're homeschooled, it might be something I'm waiting for from a church or a mosque or a club, something to tell me more about the child. But I'm pretty clear that I've seen that they've got difficulties. But in order to fully diagnose them, I do need to have evidence of it being pervasive. Watchful waiting children are those who do not meet the criteria. Sometimes they'll be described as having significant ADHD traits. I will bring those ones back either by phone, and some of them then get discharged because they've grown out of whatever it is that was causing them to have attention difficulties. Sometimes they will get a diagnosis later. Sometimes they've got something clouding the issue. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Ideally, we'd like to do our school visits again, but unfortunately we've been unable to provide that because we haven't had a psychologist, and we haven't invested in the QB objective measure, which is a way of basically putting a tracer onto the child's forehead, giving them a boring task to do, and then just see whether eyes deviate. I am not absolutely convinced by the evidence of that, but I'll look at the scores if families bring them in, if they've gone private or they've decided to get their own version of the QB test done. I'll have a look at it. Okay, so why a child might not meet a diagnostic criteria, and these are the ones I think are important for you because these are the guys that keep coming back to your clinic. Why is the doctor doing nothing? Why there's nothing being done? Clearly, as one of my family say, a man on the bus could see that my child has got ADHD. Often what I'm waiting for is a stable environment. That might not be possible for some of our families, but the best that we can do, we have displaced families, we have children in mother and baby units, we have people that move in and out of borough. We demonstrate the child isn't distracted by other things. Safeguarding, of course, can weigh very much into this. The other thing that as well I haven't included here is children who come up with genetic diagnosis years down the line. So as gene investigations start to become more sophisticated, I have had children I've sent off for genetic reviews, and their clinical profile has been explained by a rare genetic abnormality and not by ADHD. That's often really interesting for me. They're very I've got about 2 or 3 of these children, and when you look back, they've not responded to medication. But those are a little bit unusual. The ones that tend to wait for some time before they can have their diagnosis included or excluded are the looked after children who often have attachment issues. But again, we might be missing data such as family history. And what I'm really keen to do and make sure is that we're balancing between over and under diagnosing, not wasting our family's time and your time, getting it right first time. And I've got a slide here from In the Loop film because one of my fellows I'm training up, so this is really difficult. And I said it's easy peasy. She said, no, it's really difficult. But keeping children and families waiting obviously can be very uncomfortable, and I have to explain to families you might have to sit in an uncomfortable place. We'll give you support and advice around managing behaviour as best we can, but in terms of a diagnosis, the time will tell. Okay, don't be too worried about this slide. It was just to show you, just so you can see there are some pie charts here. This was a study that we did with a medical student looking at your referrals and also referrals from other areas like schools, looking at the language of referrals, because I was kind of curious as why persistently girls are referred in less than boys, and diagnosis, interestingly, we've diagnosed girls many times fewer than boys. Boys globally are referred 10 times more frequently and diagnosed 4 times as much, although that's starting to shift. But there's a big gap. Boys tend to get diagnosed 3 years earlier. And is there a gender bias? So we looked at all of your referrals, and thank you very much for all of those wonderful referrals. And we did some Excel text mining, and we looked at 2 cohorts. So that's why I'm showing you those pie charts between 2015, 2018. Terms used such as naughty, messy, needy, chatty were sometimes used for girls. Violent, rough, rude, silly, extra, and fussy were sometimes used for boys. So there is a little bit of difference there. But consistently for both genders across the 2 epochs, 2015, 2018, was the impact that these children have on referrers and families, not on the children themselves. So they were described as difficult. There were words like worried and impacting on others. So that's very interesting. I'm again, it's a 10-year project to get the emphasis shifted onto the children and away from the people who are looking after them. Although clearly that's something that has to happen hand in hand. Girls are referred more for attention needs rather than hyperactivity, but we are seeing more hyperactive girls. And interestingly, and again, this is going to link in with Charlie's work later, there are more descriptive terms related to emotions, low mood, sadness in girls compared to boys. And there may be some more mental health difficulties in girls, and that might be related to the fact that they're being sent in later, diagnosed later, and there may be the influence of undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder. And again, I don't have figures for you, but girls are diagnosed much later, and they may have significant mental health difficulties that have built up over a while because of both of them being undiagnosed. But the good news is that we're getting many more girls being referred in, and there's much more consistent diagnosis between the genders. We do see the odd gender dysphoria or people that describes themselves as trans, but there's still only a very small number, and I suspect there are many more that aren't talking about that to me in the clinic, although I make it a welcoming space for them. So service plans. So we are understaffed, like you all are. We are missing one nurse at the moment, but we should have 2 by 2024. We should restart our parenting program, which just fell off during COVID. Although the 123 Magic program was still being offered by Contact. Sen in Mind, which is now what Contact used to be, may still be offering that. That's something I need to look up for you. But we should be starting the Triple P parenting program in 2024, which is group work with our families, which will offer to all of our EIC families, and follow-up clinics individually for families with behaviour. And what we're starting to do is funnel in some of our more behaviourally challenged children and some other families who are coping less well with them. We're hoping to bring back our assistant psychologist, which will mean that we'll have some support within our service to again direct our children to psychology services within CAMS, but we won't be able to, I don't think, offer clinical psychology unless they have medical needs. I'm hoping still to introduce a pharmacist clinic. We have our lead pharmacist is trained up. We're looking at funding for that. I've done a Saturday clinic. Sorry, I've said that I want to do more, but I've got a slide here about this is from The Guardian, so it has a particular view, of course, but waiting list pledge has been downgraded. And we've been told that there's no more Saturday clinics in the offing, but that may yet change. Transition is I want to use a different word other than nightmare, but it is horrible. And I know I'm going to leave space for questions at the end. At the moment, what we're only able to do is to say when children get to 18, it's relatively, I'm doing air quotes, easy if they have learning difficulty needs because they go to the learning disability adults team. If they go on to university, they need to be picked up by their university doctors for prescribing. If they have significant mental health needs, they will need to be sent to a psychiatrist, and I know that the waiting time for that is many years. What I've hoped to be able to do is send some children to the Richmond service, because they have a young person ADHD service, but I'm not unaware, and you can please tell me if you've managed to do this. I'm unaware of any children being able to be taken over because that has a cost implication because it's out of borough. And I think very sadly, the Maudsley has now closed its referrals to our young people, which is very frustrating. I've spent, in fact, a couple of years trying to get some of our more complex children over. So it is something that I bring up every time we have ICB meetings. I want to hope that it will be a priority, but with the merger of different services, I think they're looking at different pathways at the moment, and it's not at the top of the list. But please be reassured, I am banging on about transition because I know what happens is that you end up looking after our children, our young people, making sure that they have prescriptions, and you can tell me how supported you feel about that in the questions. Okay, in terms of supply issues, I just want to thank you once more. Keep in touch with your pharmacists because they're in touch with our pharmacists. And if you can make the changes I've suggested, which essentially don't stop the guanfacine suddenly, let me know about guanfacine, children on guanfacine, if you can't locate that. Atomoxetine can be swapped over to liquid formulation. Concerta and Equisim can be swapped over to Medikinet plus Medikinet tablets. And there is a conversion from lisdexamfetamine to dexamphetamine. And again, if you're feeling confident and you're happy to follow the advice I gave, please do. If you don't, let me know. I'm delighted. I'm hearing that there's some of the medication is now popping up in some of the pharmacies, but we've recently been told that it's still not available until after Christmas. So it's not quite finished, although we do get little sort of excited flurries when we find out there's little pockets of lisdexamphetamine in Putney, for example. We do have some in the pharmacy in George's, but really not much. It is literally a matter of packets. This all happened so quickly. We went to our pharmacy and said, how many have we got? And they said 3. I said, what, 3 boxes? No, 3 tablets. It really just did all happen very quickly. And I know this is happening across services. Okay, so ASD, a very quick rundown, and I've had a look at Penny's fantastic slides. They're very detailed, so I know you'll get copies of these. But just to remind you that your referrals to ASD are triaged by us, and they go to the emerging needs panel. And then they're divided up into those that need to have a multidisciplinary review, or those who would just need advice and support along the way. The idea of this emerging needs panel and single portal was to provide some equality across the boroughs, across the borough. I say boroughs because, as I say, pathways are being looked at across the boroughs in South West. But they've managed to clear much of their backlog now, although the waiting time still is significant. I didn't say actually our waiting time for clinical diagnosis is 16 months at the moment. It's not ideal. I'm trying to get it down. I got a little bit frantic when it got to 9 months last year, but because of the number of children coming in, that's why it's expanded. And I know ASD is in a similar kind of look. Across the UK, we're reasonably in the middle there. Some ADHD waiting time is 5 years, and we don't want to get to that. Really, if you need any reassurance, this is something that keeps me up at night thinking about diagnostic times. Anyway. Children get support along the pathway for ASD. So if they come in, they will get support from the multidisciplinary team. So if you have children coming back who are waiting for their ASD diagnosis, then do let Pani and her team know. And you've got the developmental secretary's email there. There is ongoing support for these children, because I know these are the ones that do come back to you. So the assessment is multi-agency and involves doing a half-day assessment, and different boroughs do different sorts of assessments, but that's what we do in here. And you'll be aware of the Wandsworth Autism Advisory Service, which is sort of growing and changing, and they can offer support to families for children that have been diagnosed, but also children that are pre-diagnosis who have clinical symptoms. I'm going to skip this one actually because it's lovely, but there's lots of details there for you. But I know we're running out of time. But after 3 years of this current pathway, there are some issues with it. There are some confusion around it because it is quite a complex pathway. There has been worries about those receiving support. There is a lot of paperwork that creates a lot of time. All community paediatrics involves an awful lot of paperwork, as you can imagine. And there is a variability on how long children wait. And as I've just said, there is a decreased capacity for diagnostic assessments, and that's in ADHD and in ASD. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this now. Hopefully pop back onto the Teams picture. So thank you very much. I'm open to questions now for the next 5 minutes or so, I think.
Thank you, Serena. There are a few questions. Can you hear me in the chat?
I can hear you.
There are a few questions.
Go ahead, sir. I can't see the chat, so just ask.
Yeah, there are 2 questions in the chat. One from Morag, who was asking whether there is medication currently available from pharmacies. And she asked a question about the percentage of ADHD referral which end up being called a diagnosis as ADHD.
What a brilliant question. It's so funny. I was just thinking that's my next medical student project. I've got a student coming up. I'm desperate to know, because Pani in that slide has written, and there's how many are diagnosed with ASD. I will can I this time next year? Can I tell you? I love that question. I want to find out. I'm going to guess it's pretty high because I get asked, okay, Serena, you're triaging essentially everybody that comes through on triage through to an ADHD assessment. That can't be right. And I said, well, look, if I have some evidence that our GPs or anybody's getting it wrong, but I'm really not, I discharge at review, first review, a handful. It really is, and it's often that they've had all those other things that I've said, like an unstable environment and or speech and language delay. They've suddenly got all the speech and language therapy services, and they're not disrupting anymore because they can concentrate now because they can interact. Are there medications in the pharmacies? In the pharmacy at St George's, there's some. We've had a little bit more. We're working on the safety aspects of getting the adult guanfacine and the adult lisdexamfetamine. Now, without giving it away, patient confidentiality, there's one of my patients, there is a parent is a paediatrician, and in their pharmacy they have started to use adult lisdexamfetamine, and we've agreed we could. So I think we are hoping that at least for those two groups. But what was, again, one of the first things we say to families when they ring in, we can't get the medicines, we can't, you know, we will make sure that they've been to 2 or 3 pharmacies, because there are in other pockets in pharmacies. It gets a little bit apocalyptic sometimes, but go, I know there's some in this pharmacy, I'm running to get it now before nobody else gets it. I wish I knew when it was all going to be over. After Christmas, I don't know. I'm sorry, it is a pain.
There was another question, but I think probably self-explanatory, where somebody, Zainab, asked whether they need to fill forms, scoring forms before they refer to you. I think you answered that if they are just worried about ADHD. Yeah. We
sort that all out. So the families will, we contact the families. So that's what happens in the EIC. We get an email and we ask the families to fill in forms. So there's a bit of divide between the different consultants. So Alia and Dipti, who I'm sure you get letters from, will tend to send their SNAP scores or their Connors forms out in advance to the families, so they complete it before they get there. But I've just found that some of our families, English isn't the first language, or they're not particularly good at forms. I do a live form collection in the clinic because actually I get a low motivation from the family to do it. You don't have to do it. We're working on doing a Connors form where the family can fill in, and again, it will automatically score, because Connors is a kind of a very long, annoying form. It gives you a lovely graph, but again, we just worry about the family's capacity to do that. I'd rather do it with them. But yes, in terms of very interesting, there was a freedom of information question that came through about whether we screen at triage, and I said yes, I do screen, but it's me screening, as in I'm looking and reading the things, and I reject very, very few. There is a screening program that got introduced somewhere, and I'm not even going to guess where it was, for adult ADHD, and they managed to exclude something like 94% of the adults who are asking for ADHD referral. So, and I suspect their screening was just too tight. The other thing is there, if we screened using school reports, some of our schools have a view on ADHD, which is that they either, it depends on the Senko, don't believe in ADHD, which is still a thing, believe it or not, or we don't have a problem with it because we manage these children really nicely. So sometimes you have to read through the lines, and that's when doing school observations was really good, because if you sent somebody in and they would be observing a child and have an index child and another child, and see what's like, because again, some classes and some schools are much noisier, busier, and have a bigger load of children with safeguarding or other environmental issues as well. So it's a fascinating condition because there are social elements to it. Anyway, I'm going to stop because I will go on. Are there other questions?
Yeah, there's another question which I assume the answer. Somebody asked, Sheila asked, whether children known to ASD clinic, whether they will be prioritized when they refer to ADHD. My assumption is that transiting from ASD to ADHD should be easy because you are the same team, but I might be wrong.
So sorry, I missed the beginning bit because it went a bit.
So when with children with ASD who are previously known to the neurodevelopmental team be prioritized when referred for ADHD?
Okay, sorry. So in terms of children who have ASD, well, I'll just tell you a little bit about ASD, ADHD. So if you refer children in, you think they might have ADHD and ASD, I will then triage them to send them to the emerging needs panel. So even if you send me a child that you think has ADHD, I will see them. But I will also, if I think they've got ASD, will refer to the emerging needs panel. If they already have autism, again, they'll come to me for an assessment. So again, I didn't talk because last time I talked a lot about the fact that there's probably about 30% of children with autism and ADHD. They are our most challenging group. They because of when they have emotional dysregulation and impulsivity and hyperactivity, they are sometimes get themselves into more trouble than others. And we had one child who created mayhem in our emergency department. This has set off a whole load of pathways that we didn't have, which was really, really good. Did I answer the question? I'm sorry, I think because I didn't quite get the question right there.
Sheila can unmute and...
Yeah, hi Serena, hope you're well.
I'm very well. You're right there.
Yes,
nice to see you.
Yes, nice to see you again. So yeah, it was just about children with established neurodevelopmental needs, say ASD. Will they get prioritized waiting list wise because they have additional problems?
Really good question. I had an emergency clinic at one stage, Sheila, and that just got filled up with other things. I have a cancellation list. So when people come through, if you say this is an urgent one, or I'm really worried about this one, I will say, can we prioritize this one, or can we put on the cancellation list? We just don't have the capacity to run an emergency list because, again, what will happen? I'll say, have I got any emergencies this week? And everyone will go, no, but we filled it in with 3 other things. We will do our best. Just keep flagging them for me, please do. I absolutely, you trust your clinical judgment on this. If you want me to see them urgently, I'll do my best. But again, I can't. And again, as I said, once they're in our pathway, the families can email us. So even if you feel that they need to be seen, and if there's too long a gap, just pass on our Paediatrics developmental secretaries at stgeorges.nhs.uk email address, and we will communicate with them. So we can direct them to all other services. Again, it will mean that they'll say sometimes, oh, forget all this, I just need diagnosis, I just need medication. And that may be frustrating for them because there may be a wait, but we'll do our best for them.
Thanks, Serena. And the other part of the question was, before I understood the service pathway, I'd read that there was a special medical needs clinic, and then I looked it up and there seemed to be a SEN clinic at George's. And I don't know why, I thought, well, that might, if you're already statemented, that might be the clinic that you refer kids into to then funnel them to the thing they need. Is that completely wrong then?
No, that's the SEN assessment clinic for their EHCP. So no, that sounds nice, but no. But just keep in touch with us if they need something. Just let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
So I've lost my big screen. There were 2 questions about your equivalent in Merton, and another question of the minimum age for diagnosis of ASD and ADHD.
The minimum age. Oh, good question. I'll answer this quickly because I've run over time, haven't I? So yeah. What's the Merton services? I don't know exactly. I think they have a general community paediatric type clinic. I don't know if they have an ADHD lead. We're very lead driven in Wandsworth, and that's the way we like it. But I think Merton is a bit of a mix. And I don't want to misrepresent them because I don't know, but I think they have clinics that are a mixture of everything. So I think you're just going into a general waiting list thing. But again, that's all being reviewed at the moment. Minimum age for diagnosis for ADHD, it's rising 5. I'm very loath to make a diagnosis in a 4.5-year-old. I'm really unlikely to do it before 5. Technically, it should be closer to 6. But what I will do often is I'm not going to make a full diagnosis of ADHD until 6. That's very unusual. But if you do see them before then, they're usually because they've got autism, with hyperactivity and impulsiveness, and I will call it ADHD, ASD with hyperkinesis, because those are the ones that often respond to stimulant medication. So those are the ones that come and break your clinic room, the ASD kids who are very, very active. And honestly, I don't mind, it's my day job, but I do get chairs thrown at me quite a bit. And a child just screaming up in my face on Tuesday, shouting, "Hey, word!" really loudly. They're the ones that respond really well to stimulant medication, and that can be a lifesaver for the families. Again, this family on Tuesday who were tag teaming each other, running up and down corridors, chasing this super bright, super self-agendered boy. But yeah, no, before 5, not really going to happen. Before 6, unusual, but more likely associated with ASD. That's the DSM.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to let you go, and
thank you.
If you were to be here towards the end, you're welcome. But thank you very much, and I know you will do it again because you love teaching. Thank you, Serena.
I do. Thank you, and thanks everybody. Lovely to see you, and thanks, Hannah.
Thank you. So next is Hannah, my colleague Hannah, who is going to talk about weight. I think she can tell you everything about herself. I don't want to make mistakes.
Thanks, Giordano. Okay. Hi, everyone. So thanks so much for accommodating me coming a little earlier. Ironically enough, given that this is a GP half day, I've managed to get a GP appointment for my son, but it's at 3 o'clock. That was the only time available. So bringing my session forwards makes life much easier. So thanks for that. So I'm talking to you about obesity today. I'm just going to share my slides with you, hopefully, so that you can see them. And then I'll introduce myself in a bit more detail. Let me just see if I can do this. This one. Okay, is that visible? Can someone just let me know?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yes. Okay, great. So I'm Hannah. I'm a general paediatric consultant at St George's, and I'm setting up the new Q service, the Complications Related to Excess Weight Clinic, CEW, at St George's, which is due to start fairly imminently. And I have an interest in obesity that largely stemmed from some time in my training that I spent working in public health. So I did a secondment in Haringey Council, and I worked with the public health department there for a year in my training. And I got quite engrossed in a project about healthy eating and messages around creating kind of a whole school food guide that was shared with all schools in the borough of Haringey, which is about 79 primary and secondary schools and some special needs schools and things. And it really sort of piqued my interest in the role of preventative health and the challenges associated with obesity, the scale of the rising problem of obesity. And so then when I started at St George's and they were setting up this Q service, they kind of said, "Hannah, do you want to do this?" And I thought, why not? That sounds like a good opportunity. So I'm going to tell you a little bit just around general obesity, and then I'm going to talk a bit about the Q service. And then there should be plenty of time for questions, hopefully. And then please do write anything in the chat if Giordano is okay to monitor that again, or just ask me at the end. And then there'll be a little break after this session for you to have a cup of tea. Okay, so why are we talking about obesity? Well, we know it's a huge global issue. It's so much more of an issue now than it was even 10 years ago. Some of these headlines are pretty old and they're shock and awe headlines. And then this headline is from Wandsworth this year, and it's quite shocking really to say that a fifth of children in Wandsworth were classed as obese on leaving primary school last year. And when I think about the whole school food guide that I made, that was really around, you'll notice, and in fact my next slide, no, my next slide's the one after that will show it, but there's a massive shift between reception age kids on the NCMP, the National Child Measurement Programme data, and year 6 children and leaving primary school. And so I feel that this is the area where we really have the most scope for intervention. The kids in primary school are generally quite receptive to the ideas they're taught about by their teachers and their peer group. And I think that by having much more awareness teaching about making healthy choices in primary schools, really pushing the agenda for school lunches rather than packed lunches, because we know from data that only 1% of packed lunches meet national food standards, whereas school food by definition has to meet national food standards. They're not perfect, but they're a lot better than the vast majority of packed lunches are. So pushing that agenda, improving catering contracts, and there was lots of advice in the guidance we wrote about procuring good catering contracts, about incorporating sort of lesson plans, incorporating healthy eating ideas, vegetable growing in schools so that children have an idea of the food that they're eating and where it comes from, and also things like the Daily Mile promoting lots of activity, mindfulness, sleep hygiene, all of those things that go into having a good sense of health and well-being. So the reason that we are interested in it, we all know, working with young people, adults as well, that there is still a huge amount of stigma associated with obesity. It has huge emotional and behavioural consequences for children that goes all the way through to adulthood. It's widely known that people who struggle with obesity often are more likely to be bullied, and they suffer from lower self-esteem. They have higher rates of school absence, often linked with those emotional and behavioural aspects. And then you, as GPs, will see many of the impacts on adults with your KPIs, with their high cholesterol, their high blood pressure, their pre-diabetes, their bone and joint problems, and their breathing difficulties. And we're seeing more and more and more of this in our adolescent population for that reason. And we know that if you're obese on leaving primary school, and particularly on leaving secondary school, that your likelihood of staying obese for the rest of your life is significantly higher, and there's an associated risk of ill health and earlier death as a consequence of that. So this is the statistics I was mentioning before. So this is from the National Child Measurement Programme. This is England's data, not local data, but actually the statistics aren't wildly different in Wandsworth and Merton to how they are nationally. They are slightly worse, but it's marginal. But you'll see there that around 10% of children are now going into reception already obese, and a further 12% are overweight at that point. And then by the time they come out at year 6, we've got nearly 23% obese and 14% overweight. And when I worked in public health 5 years ago, that was flipped around, where the obese percentage was the smaller figure and the overweight percentage was the larger figure. So that already a shift just in the last 5 years. And so, you know, although it's quite shocking that we've got 20% odd of children going into reception overweight and obese, and that's where early childhood interventions, things like the Henry programme, things like our health visiting teams, our messaging around families in those first years of life really come into play. Then we see this significant shift over the course of that primary school period. And I thought I'd put up some Merton statistics. I don't know the borough of Merton brilliantly, and as GPs working around these areas, I'm sure you will have a much better sense of this. But I always find graphs like this very interesting to see, and we had very similar for Haringey, in that the east of the borough was much more socioeconomically deprived than the west. And in line with that socioeconomic deprivation, we see the prevalence of obesity significantly shift by ward. So this is year 6 of primary school local NCMP data for Merton. And you will see that more than 25% of Year 6 children are obese. These wards, Cricket Green, Pollard's Hill, London, Marsh and Ravensbury. And then you come across that figure in Dundonald is less than 10%. So there's significant differences here across this east-west boundary that's set out by the local public health team. And then I think this is something that we also looked at in Haringey that I found very interesting. And this is called a food desert. And that is a food desert by definition is somewhere where it's difficult to get hold of fresh food, and there is a much higher proportion of unhealthy takeaway options easily available, and less of the easy access to fresh food. And you can see that it goes hand in hand, that the areas where they have most easily available fresh food are the areas with less obesity, and the areas with less fresh food and more unhealthy takeaways are the areas with higher obesity. And I know that seems really obvious, but I can't tell you how frustrating it is when you work inside a council and you've got the public health team there really lobbying for reduced advertising of junk food, of promoting healthy eating messages in the schools, having whole system obesity approaches, and then that same council have a different arm granting licenses to chicken shops next door to secondary schools. It's incredibly frustrating, and I think this just further highlights that, really. So I just thought I'd put up some local resources. Again, I'm sure you will know much more about this than I will, but it was much easier to find resources for Merton than it was for Wandsworth. So obviously there's NHS website with kind of general broad messages that we can give to families to promote healthier lifestyles. And there are these initiatives in terms of children's weight management services in Wandsworth, where they have a program for mums, a program for young children, and then a program for teenagers that you can sort of get links to and sign up here for. And then the next page is Merton. So I thought this was very interesting. So this is Cricket Green Medical Practice, and if anyone on here is from Cricket Green, I'd pat yourselves on the back, because they have the most fantastic website. And if I just go back for those who don't know, hang on a sec, Cricket Green being this area here of significant obesity, so really good to be tackling this. They have this brilliant website with loads of links to all of the locally available Merton weight management services, and I thought it was really clear and easy to follow, and so I've just put this up here to show you the sorts of things that that can be useful signposting for patients, in a world that is as under-resourced as it is. Okay, so this is our current St George's Hospital Care Pathway for Childhood Obesity. This will tweak once Q is formally off the ground and up and running, but I just wanted to flag it to make sure that everyone's sort of aware of what we are doing at the moment. So I'm going to show some centile charts in a minute, but essentially at the moment, if a child is identified as overweight, that's above the 91st centile with BMI, and above the 98th centile of BMI, it classes as obese. So the first thing is to raise the issue of weight with the family in a sensitive way, and see if there is willingness to change. And that's really key, and I'll talk about that again when we talk about the Q clinics. If there's not willingness to change, then that's not the moment to have that intervention, really. But it is right to signpost to resources and to bring it up again, because sometimes this is a difficult thing to talk about and people need some time to come to terms with it, and they need the right set of circumstances to be receptive. So obviously if there's persistent non-engagement and there's a concern of harm, then that can become something to be raised as a safeguarding concern. But certainly if you're an obese child in an obese family where everything is otherwise loving, it's quite a difficult line to draw. But so it's all about kind of trying to broach this in a sensitive way and get the family on board in a way where it doesn't feel like there's a lot of judgment and criticism. If they are willing to change, we're thinking about their BMI, as I say, whether the family are generally obese, exploring their history. Is this obesity that's been there from birth? Are we then looking more at the genetic conditions? And again, I'll touch on that again when I talk about Q. Thinking about what sort of exercise they do, what's their mental health like, and do they have any of the features of pre-diabetes, etc. This is a really important step, and I know that our community dietetics services are struggling, but I think it is important that, especially thinking about Q referrals, kids have had the opportunity to be referred to a community dietitian in the first instance to get some input. And then we think about investigations, and I think it's really, really helpful if some of these investigations can be done in the community prior to referral, so that we know what we're looking at when we're triaging. Are we already looking at impaired glucose tolerance from that fasting glucose and their HbA1c? Have they already got signs of, non-alcoholic fatty liver, in which case we're getting an ultrasound scan? What are their triglycerides like? What's their cholesterol like? And then if any of these are abnormal, we're referring on to secondary care, and you can kind of see how they progress. At the moment, when they do come to secondary care, because they have these associated problems, our input is often, again, limited to dietitian, etc. But that's where Q is kind of giving us a bit of an edge, but it's only for a very niche demographic of kids, which I will mention. And so we've still got, obviously, the endocrine clinics for those children where it's felt to be that there's an endocrine problem. We've got the pre-diabetes, we've got obesity and decreased height velocity, we've got severe obesity under 2 years old, so on, so on. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the Q Clinic. So this is an NHS England directive. There's currently 2 Q clinics for London. The one for West London runs out of Great Ormond Street and UCLH together, and the one for East London runs from Barts and the London and King's. King's is being the bariatric surgery centre, and Barts and the London hosting the Q clinics. But actually, they realised that it's quite difficult for patients with significant complicating factors and, often some ill health and some neurodiversity and other factors to travel in centrally to Great Ormond Street for these appointments. And so they had difficult recruitment and quite high DNA rates. So that's why there's a bid to have a local service at St George's. The Q Clinic is very specifically for children aged between 2 and 18. So those children with obesity under 2 will still go to endocrinology. And we're also looking at children with significant health problems related to obesity. This is the complications of excess weight. So things like type 2 diabetes, obstructive sleep apnea, and so on. So if they are very severely overweight, but they have other issues, high cholesterol, blood pressure, etc., we will also consider them and triage the referrals. The key referral criteria are obesity, these comorbidities, and crucially wanting help to change. That receptiveness is really key. And if they don't have comorbidities, but they do have really severe obesity, and that's a Z score of more than 3.33, even without the other medical factors, then we will see them as long as they still are ready and receptive to change. And we will see across the whole of the Southwest London area. Okay. So just to highlight what the significance of that Z-score is, a Z-score of above 3.33 really means that we're seeing the top 0.1% of BMIs within that category. So just to highlight on a BMI chart, then we're looking at, I mean, most of the Q referrals that come through are 12 plus. And so when you're thinking about them then running on this line, assuming they don't have significant comorbidities and we're going on obesity alone, then you're talking about kids with a BMI generally above 35, and the older teenagers, it's above 37, 38. Okay. In terms of essential screening tests, I talked in our previous or our current referral form, if ideally the kids being referred into Q, because it is a specialist service, will have had some interventions first. So community dietitian, you know, often they should really have been seen in secondary care and have had some interventions before. But if you are seeing in your primary care setting a severely obese young person who's very keen for change, then I would definitely consider that referral. It is quite a lengthy form, and I would be very grateful if there could be as much detail as possible, because it really will help us with the triaging. But the things that we would ask for are blood pressure and these bloods to be carried out in advance. If there's the possibility of having a liver ultrasound scan, that would also be helpful. And I've just put a link to the blood pressure centile charts down here to see where they plot according to their height. Okay, so that is the end of all of the things I was just going to talk about. Let me see if I can come out of this and stop sharing and come back to you for questions.
Hannah, there are a few questions in the chat. If you can have a look, or if we let those who have a question to ask them. Can I ask one question before they come in? One of the criteria for referral is family wants help to change.
Yeah.
If the family does not want to change, what do you want the GP to do? Does this move into safeguarding?
So
I'm putting you on the spot because you happen to be a safeguarding person.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, the thing is, it's about establishing a relationship, isn't it? And I think that because weight is such a difficult and sensitive issue for many people, having a conversation about it, you know, often won't be the answer. But then on that same vein, if they come into a highly specialized clinic with no desire to change their lifestyle and no insight into there being a problem, it's a bit of a wasted use of the service. So it's about building that relationship. And I think, you know, the advantage for the GPs is that they tend to know the whole family and they have a sense of whether there are concerns. And I wrote a piece about this a while ago. I mean, I think it's really difficult to pick where obesity becomes classed as a safeguarding concern. But I think that if you've got a child who is so obese that it's affecting their health, you know, really adversely affecting their health, and the family are completely non-engaging, and we've tried our absolute best to establish a relationship and to work with them, and there's still nothing, then yes, it does become a safeguarding concern. I mean, the young person in Wales who died within the last year from morbid obesity, you know, her parents ended up going to prison. So I think ideally the answer to your question, Giordani, what do the GPs do about it, is they try and, you know, have that conversation at different time intervals, maybe with different people. Maybe there's a school nurse, maybe there's a practice nurse, maybe there's somebody else, maybe they refer to the community dietitians to have a discussion, but they try and bring in the idea that it's something that needs to be addressed, because actually, if you're causing significant adverse health issues, then it's a safeguarding concern like many others would be, really, but a difficult one.
Okay, thank you. I think we related the other great questions to ask them.
Oh, I see someone from Cricket Green. There you go. Well done. Yes, I can imagine it is a real challenge for you, because seeing those statistics, you really see how dark your purple patch is. And I know that it's a difficult area because there's not nearly enough emphasis on the prevention side, on the public health side, and there's little resource, really, truly. So it's great to signpost, but it's a bit like breastfeeding. In some areas you get quite good support, in other areas you really don't, and it's difficult for lots of people. So I can see Morag has said, when's it better to look at BMI percentiles rather than weight percentiles? Well, we look at BMI percentiles for Q because actually what we're interested in is weight relative to height. Obviously, we know that sometimes the interplay between weight and height isn't quite right, and that's when you're looking more at some of those endocrine causes. We know that overweight children tend to grow faster in height as well, but the nature of Q is very specifically about being particular above particular BMI cutoffs. So it's showing that degree of obesity rather than just looking at weight in isolation. What help is there for those children that don't quite meet those obesity criteria in the community? Well, not much is the truth. So there's the sort of resources that I signposted to. There's Change for Life. There are your local exercise groups. Sometimes there are local sporting groups. I know that when I worked in Haringey, that the Tottenham Football Club were quite active and would do quite a lot of classes with overweight kids in the area, and things like that. But it's about kind of knowing your local resources, and I don't know all of them, but if you can tap into good websites like the one I highlighted from your colleague, it can really help with signposting. And yes, you can refer from Kingston. It's within our South West London patch, so we take across all of those places listed. It includes, let me just tell you, Croydon, Kingston, Merton, Richmond, Sutton and Wandsworth. Okay. Are there any other questions from anybody?
I think you still got over 10 minutes if they have questions. What will be the pathway for referring to the Q clinic? And how do they bypass general pediatrics? Yeah.
There's a lengthy referral form which will be available on the website. So we're making a web page that links to the referral form at the moment. So once the Q clinic is open to referrals, you should be able to search for the Q at St George's and find the page about it, and then click on the link to the referral form, and then that can get referred into us and we'll triage it.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions from anybody else?
If there are no questions, we'll let you run to your GP appointment.
Thank you. I think you've got a tea break now, haven't you? Anyway, so it just makes it slightly longer tea break. But yes, I hope that was useful. And I know that it's quite a depressing topic often. So I hope everyone's not feeling too sad and can feel like they can go and have a biscuit with their tea now without feeling too much guilt about it as well.
Yeah, that's good. So Vicky, shall we pause and regroup at 2:45?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Everyone can be back at 2:45.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. Bye.
Hello to those who've just joined us. There was a slight amendment to the agenda in that our last speaker went before the break, so we're now on a break for 25 minutes. So the next speaker will start at 2:45. Thank you. Hello, Maya. It's Vicky here.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Everyone's on just having a quick cup of tea.
Yeah, no, I've been on my phone. I've just transferred to the computer. So I've been
okay.
there. I just transferred to my computer. I got to figure out how to share, don't I?
If you can, but if you can't, then I will also figure out how to share, and then you can just say next slide every time you want me to flag. Oh, I can see already.
Is that shared? Oh, perfect.
You just need to do a slideshow, I think, and then you're good to go.
Start. Lovely.
Perfect.
Oh, that was far too easy.
Don't say that.
Fine, this is going to be, I've got a clock with me because I have a lot to say.
Okay, lovely. Well, that's absolutely fine. So you're due to start at 2:45.
Yes, right. I'll go get a cup of tea.
Lovely. Thank you.
Not at all. See you
Maya,
later.
why do you underestimate your technical abilities?
Oh, no, I don't. It's just, as you know, Giordone, I always have a lot to say.
Yeah, that's fine.
I am not known for my quiet demeanor.
It will be all right. Talk. We have time.
Yes, I know. But last night I suddenly decided that I was going to run through all the imaging we do as well to tell them how horrible it is to make that we need culture results.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So
It's a
let's
good
start
topic,
when
love it. So
you're ready. When you come back at quarter two.
perfect. I'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.
I think you're going to play the piano. Oh, you. Okay, okay.
No, Laura plays piano, not me.
Vicky, can you mute Maya for her privacy, please? I can't do it.
Thank you.
Shall we start?
You're muted, Maya.
Let's try again. Right, can my slides be seen?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, excellent. And everyone can hear me. Right, hello everybody. So my name's Maya Kerr. I'm one of the general peds at St. George's with a specialist interest in kidneys. And we're going to talk about UTIs in children and mainly preventing recurrent urinary tract infections in children. So moving on. So we're going to define recurrent and also atypical urinary tract infections in children, how they're managed differently in children to adults, the role of primary care, which is really large, history and examination, parental educational vigilance, parental educational prevention, imaging and referrals to me. And if we have time, we'll go through the imaging that we do in the hospital for the kids. Let's go to the next one. Ooh.
Oh, we lost Maya.
She dropped off the call.
Don't know what happened.
But she's back.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I think somehow you guys lost me. Apologies for that. We will get back to it. We were just going, oh, no, that's not it. There we go. Slideshow, play from start. Sorry about that. So we've done that. So the main thing to talk about, and this is the real take home
Maya,
oh.
there are no slides. There are no slides.
Oh, there are no slides. Okay. Let's go back to the Teams. Am I not sharing? I should be sharing. Can you hear them now? Can you see them now, I mean?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Slideshow. Slideshow from start. There we go. Okay. Right, we'll get there. Right. Right, can everybody hear me and see slides?
Yes, we
Excellent.
are.
Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. Right. We're talking about urine testing. It has to be clean catch. I do not want to see any bag urine results. I know it is super duper duper hard, but the problem is, as you will find out as we go through this presentation session, we really need solid results before treatment. And the number of times you use bags and you get contamination because the bags touch the skin, the urine touches the skin. And it's also, unless you're using needles and stuff, it's very hard to get the urine out of the bags. They're almost a waste of time. So I know it's hard, but we really, really have to. When you test the urine in your surgery, there are really, people are often a bit like, oh, should I start antibiotics? Shouldn't I? There are really definitive guidelines, nice guidelines, essentially, that if you're under 3 and you have either a leukocyte or nitrite, just treat. If they're older than 3, if it's nitrite positive, treat, send for culture. Might be positive, might be negative, but you're going to treat while you find out. If it's leukocyte positive, but nitrite negative, still send for culture. And unless it really is clinically, really obviously a UTI, it is much more likely to be contaminant. The leukocytes probably coming from the skin or elsewhere, whilst nitrites are much more specific. So it's really quite clear and cut as to whether you need to be treating, but you must send for culture. And the reason of that is it's not a urinary tract infection unless you get an isolated single growth of organism greater than 10 to the power of 9 and white blood cells of greater than 40. It doesn't really matter that much what the child presented with, because so often a child will present with fever and they won't be drinking as much because they're not feeling well and they've got increased sensual losses. So their urine becomes concentrated, and that makes them have dysuria, can even make them wet themselves a bit sometimes. Or they can complain of tummy pains because of just lymph nodes, mesenteric lymph nodes and things. So they often get interpreted as urinary tract infections when they aren't. And that is actually really, really important. And we're going to go through. And it's because of what happens after. Once you've diagnosed a urinary tract infection, it sets in motion a steam train, essentially, of investigations that have to be done that we'll go through. And it puts the kids through quite a bit, which, unless we've got concrete evidence, is hard to do. So you say, well, they get an ultrasound. An ultrasound isn't a big deal, but it's still a hospital appointment and all the rest of it. So if they're under 6 months and they have a urinary tract infection of just one urinary tract infection that you've diagnosed, they have to have an ultrasound by 6 weeks. This is all nice guidelines. If it's an atypical infection, which we will go through what that is, it should be during the acute infection. And I know some of you are putting your hand up and go, oh, but how do I know it's atypical? I don't get the result back for a couple of days. And the answer is that it doesn't matter. If it's responding well to antibiotics and there's no other weird features, which we will go through, it can wait for the 6 weeks, so don't panic. If they're over 6, oh, I've written under there, but if they're over 6 months, you do not have to do an ultrasound unless it's recurrent or atypical. So the nice guidelines show there that you've got to do that ultrasound, but then also if you have an atypical or recurrent, you have to do a DMSA. And this is not a small investigation, and you have to do an MCUG, which is a hideous investigation, and I'll go through that with you. But I do not want to put a child through that unless I have a really good, positive, confirmed result. So a mixed growth, well, they were a bit unwell, but they didn't have any white cells. We have to actually make that decision definitively because it sets in motion this for the child. So what is a recurrent UTI? It's actually not a lot. It is only 2 or more episodes of upper infection, pyelonephritis, which is actually defined as a fever greater than 38 or any loin pain and tenderness, which isn't a very rare feature with a lot of UTIs. So an awful lot of children qualify within that, and they're getting more than 2 episodes, or they're getting 2 episodes quite often. Or it can be only 1 episode of upper and just a simple UTI, or 3 or more simple UTIs. So it doesn't take much to reach that threshold of your current UTI. Atypical, again, doesn't really take a lot of threshold. So they're actually seriously unwell. When they come to you, seriously unwell is with the definition from NICE, which is really to do with fevers over 38 and being generally looking poorly. You have to make that clinical decision. Any poor urinary flow with it, obviously any abdominal masses, failure to respond to antibiotics in 48 hours would indicate that it's not a normal E. coli. And any non-E. coli UTI, I don't care what it is, if it's not an E. coli, it is an atypical, and we have to go down that pathway of investigation. The other 2 I've made a lot less bright because obviously in your clinics in primary practice, you're not going to know if they've got septicemia or raised creatinine, but those are the other criteria. So still, you say, oh, but that's only the under 6 months, we need to be really careful with them. But, going up to 3, we still have to do a DMSA scan, which is a really unpleasant investigation with a lot of radiation. It's a nuclear medicine scan for a child under the age of 3. So again, I don't want to put a child through that. It's cannulas, all the rest of it, unless I'm really quite certain. And we can only be quite certain by really good sampling. And the sampling happens mainly in your practices. So why are children different? Why do we care so much about children? Why are we doing all these investigations? And it's because you are born with the full number of nephrons that you are ever going to have. So it's not like your lungs or your brain where your organs are still growing and developing. So what will happen is the nephrons will grow, but the number there, that is it. So if you damage a nephron, it's gone. So you damage a chunk off your kidney, let's say 10%, that chunk is gone forever. There is nothing we can do about it. The majority of kidney care as such for children is preventing further nephron damage. So what causes renal scarring? There's lots of different causes, but the main one we're dealing with today is a delay of treatment of a UTI more than 48 hours. The picture there is a DMSA, and you can see the difference between them. Basically, where the kidney has not taken up the dye is where the scarring is because the nephrons don't work. If you treat a urinary tract infection within 48 hours, it doesn't matter how much reflux somebody has up to their kidneys or what's going on with the plumbing or anything like that. If you treat it within 48 hours, you will not, or you're unlikely to get scarring. It's delays in treatment. You don't even have to have reflux, just the back pressure and the bugs climbing up. It is that delay of greater than 48 hours, which is the problem. And of course, with children, we have real problems defining symptoms, so we're more likely to get delay because it's not as easy. Kids to have, the older children will say, oh, it hurts when I pee, or I'm peeing more often. Obviously, younger children are not going to say anything. And then, of course, we have the joy of getting the samples, which is what I'm pleading for so much. It is not simple, and I do not have any easy tricks to give you, but it just has to be done. And unfortunately, the kidneys, the nephrons, are at their most delicate in the first year of life. So it's a really bit of a double whammy. That timing where we really struggle to pick up symptoms, we really struggle to get samples, is actually when the kids are at most risk of damaging their nephrons. So it's not well made there, I'm afraid. And also you have to kind of remember that if you present very young with a urinary tract infection, there is a higher risk that there is what I call a plumbing problem, an anatomical issue. You're unlikely to get later in life, after the age of 1, 2, and actually without any infections, and it being a PUJ or a PUV or something that needs a surgical repair. So the younger you are, the more likely it is to need investigation, essentially. So what can you do in primary care? I can't see kidneys in primary care. I can dip a urine, but actually there's loads, and you guys do it really well. So the history, we need a lot of history. The antenatal scans, you guys probably have more access to that. The real thing I need most of all is the number and type of previous urinary tract infections. What happens is I tend to get referrals to clinic that say this child's had loads of urinary tract infections. And I don't know what that means. And the parents just go, oh yeah, I've had antibiotics 10 times this year. I've had a child whose dad came and said he'd had, since I last saw them, they'd had 3 courses of antibiotics from Croydon Hospital for urinary tract infection. And when I rang Croydon and spoke to a lovely A&E consultant, he went through it with me, and actually 3 of them had all been for chest, a skin issue. Yet had I not questioned that, I probably would have gone down a quite invasive route of investigation for urine. So it's really important. Any poor urine flow, particularly in boys, every parent should be able to tell you that they have been hit by that urine flow changing a nappy. Any dysfunctional voiding, so usually it's that leaking into pants at school, they come home every day just slightly wet. Constipation, huge problem, huge issue for children, and a huge problem for urinary tract infections. And really importantly for me is the family history. So there's loads you guys can do for me there. Examination, obviously, any enlarged bladder, abdominal mass, I need to see them ASAP. Evidence of any spinal lesions, spinal bifida, poor development, anything like that could indicate a problem with the bladder. Any raised blood pressures, and examine the genitalia. Often an issue, particularly for boys, make sure they don't have foreskin issues, and we're not looking at balanitis, because when I see them in clinic, that's been dealt with and gone by the antibiotics given. So again, I'm going down a route that I shouldn't be going down. So Start antibiotics. I don't mind you starting antibiotics. You know, you've got the urine dipstick that indicates you should, even if you're not sure it's a urine infection. If in doubt, treat, because we are worried about those kidneys. But always, always, always send for culture. If the child ended up with 3 days of antibiotics they didn't need, I'm not that fussed. Should be, but I'm not. And then your advice is about advice on completing the treatment. They need to have the 3 days, definitely. And then, according to the NICE guidelines, every single child who has had a urinary tract infection, so the minute you write those antibiotics from day one, first infection, should be given prevention advice. Now, I have to be honest with you, and I have audited our NICE guidelines adherence, and we did appallingly. Only 20% of our children were given, written prevention advice. So I have done a leaflet with it all on it, and there is a QR code to make it easy for you to access. It's on our website, but it has everything on it. I will go through it with you as well in a minute, but that solves your problem. We are meant to be giving every single child who gets a UTI prevention advice, and it's not even it's not happening at our hospital. I would love to. I'm going to be working on getting that up, and I would love it if you guys could as well. On that form, and also a really big thing, is educating the parents on vigilance. As I said, this is young kids, it's a difficult age group to get the symptoms, and we do not want that delay of more than 48 hours, because then you have a much higher increased risk of scarring on those kidneys, which is permanent and nothing I can do about. So a lot of it is educating the parents. The minute that child has, particularly if they've had a urinary tract infection before, any illness, any temperatures without an obvious source. So if you've got a streaming cold and the whole family has a streaming cold, that child has a streaming cold. But if the child's unwell and you're not really quite sure why, they should not be waiting. They need a prompt urine sample. And if in doubt, you treat, because I do not want to find out, or you do not want to find out, they do not want to find out later when we get the culture results that we should have treated, because then it's more than 48 hours and then they're more of risk. And then my plea is, if they're under a hospital team, please can you let them know any positive results? Because as I say, the kids come to clinic and they say, oh yes, the GP's given me 4 antibiotics this year. And it might be that none of those were actually a positive urine sample when the culture came back. And as I say, it sends me down a very different path, and it's an unpleasant path for children. So what does this leaflet say? The main issue is to do with hydration. How much is enough? Do we do it on weight, height, age, weather, activity? The answer is everybody needs different amounts, different days, different times. It is, the child doing the sports there needs a certainly lot amount more than he does in winter, watching TV and playing on his Xbox kind of thing. So actually there's a much, much simpler way, which is a urine color chart. I love these. I have to print these out at home because there's no color printers in the hospital, and I hand them out in clinic left, right, and center. But essentially, you want your urine color. This is the end point. So this makes, it's a really obvious thing. You want it as clear as possible. One, in all honesty, is you're drinking all day and peeing all day. We've all got better things to do with our lives. So I usually tell patients to aim for 2 to 3. Anything below that, you need to drink more water. You're not hydrated. The number of patients that come to clinic and say, I'm really well hydrated, I drink loads. And then when you ask them about their urine culture, their urine color, it is way down there. The next one is about passing urine regularly. Children do not like to pass urine at school because the toilets are smelly, it's all horrible. So, but they have to. I always talk about flow with kids and patients, that if you need to drink lots and it needs to flow out. So you should pass urine every 2 to 3 hours. So this could be letters to the school or nursery to help them with that. If they're young, they tend to need a timetable. When they get to school, first break, lunch break, afternoon break, as soon as they get home, that kind of thing. And they should be passing urine 7 times a day. Then if they're a little bit older, really useful are wobble watches. What is a wobble watch, you say? Wobble watches are watches, you buy them lots of places, Amazon have them, they're about 20 quid, and you set them with a time, so every 3 hours, and rather than an alarm, which, you know, the child's like, why is your alarm going off? They just wobble on their wrist to tell them that it's time to go. So these are really useful, and they come in all sorts of designs, and kids tend to like these. The rest of the prevention advice, those are the first two, are the most important for kids who don't have any anatomical issue kind of thing. So I've put them separately. The rest is double voiding. So kids can struggle with this, and it's important to start it, even if they say, oh, I can't, you know, no, can't do it at school, don't have time, all the rest of it. I tend to tell them that they need to pee, stand up, spin around, count to 10, pee again. And the idea there is to make sure that they are voiding completely. And I always tell them that, you know, if you take a cup of pee and you stick it on a windowsill for 2 hours, it is horrible after 2 hours. It smells, it's horrible. And that's what's going on in their bladder if they don't empty it. It is most important before bed, because that is when the bladder is going to be at its biggest and fullest by the morning. So before that time, we want it as empty as possible. As I say, constipation is a really big issue for our children. And unless that's dealt with, because the urethra and the rectum are so close together, it puts pressure and back pressure and stops them emptying their bladders properly, so they end up with infection and standard wiping front to back and avoiding bubble baths. A lot of questions often asked about cranberry juice and probiotics, and the answer is we have no evidence in pediatrics, but actually, and I've yet to see a child willingly drink loads of cranberry juice, but there's no harm in them, but there is no evidence for it in children. Prophylaxis. So prophylaxis is usually trimethoprim to start with, and then we move on according to sensitivities if we're getting breakthrough antibiotics. Most are used in the under 1 age category, as I say, because the kidneys are so vulnerable at this time that's where we feel the most protection is needed. And it's often pending investigation. We will make a clinical decision. You'll often find children are stopped at 1 year of age in clinic, or we stop them after they've been fully potty trained. And this is going back to this concept that if you have a urinary tract infection and treat it within 48 hours, you are not going to get scarring. So if you have a parent who is really focused, on board, will get those samples done immediately and treatment instigated immediately, and they don't want the child on prophylaxis, that is actually fully acceptable with the evidence. Others, because until they're potty trained, it's much harder to get those samples, want to continue it until they're fully potty trained, and then you can get the samples more easily. That is a clinical decision rather than a evidence-based decision. Older children should not be on prophylaxis. It's rare, and they shouldn't be, because we should have ensured that there's no underlying anatomical issue that could be rectified. If there is, then occasionally there can be, or they're waiting for investigations to be completed. But if we've done those investigations and there's nothing there, the child should not be on prophylaxis. People often feel it's like a magical thing. Oh, if they're on prophylaxis, they won't get UTIs and we're fixed. Actually, the underlying issue, why is there not? And it's usually a flow issue to do with drinking and peeing regularly. So I don't like older children on prophylaxis. We need to get them off and deal with the issue. Who to refer? Basically, any child with a recurrent urinary tract infection, I would like to see, as I say. The criteria is not a lot, so it is quite a lot of kids, and any abnormal ultrasound results we should be seeing. In hospital, we do all sorts of investigations. I'm going to go through them with you. We do ultrasound, DMSAs, micturating cystourethograms, MAG3s. We do bladder function assessments, urodynamics, and we now do urodynamics with EMG to look at the musculature. So I thought we'd go through some of those. So with NICE guidelines, everybody under the age of 6 months gets an ultrasound, whether it's within 6 weeks or not. And they also get a DMSA and an MCUG if it's atypical or recurrent. And as we've been through that, that's not a high threshold. Ultrasound, you all know what an ultrasound is. Why do we do it? It gives you the anatomy, the position. It allows us to measure things, kidney size, dilatation, look for any abnormalities like stones and cysts. Can give us pyelonephritis, but we cannot see flow or kidney function. And that's when we move on to the DMSAs and the rest. So what is a DMSA scan? It's a big long word that nobody can say. Doesn't matter, we all call it a DMSA. You put a cannula in a child and you inject them with a radioisotope dye that is only taken up by kidney tissue. And then you take X-ray imaging, which shows you where that dye is. So anywhere where you have a scar, there is no dye being taken up, and that gives you that moth-eaten appearance that is being shown by those arrows. So below is normal kidneys, above you can see scarring with that moth-eaten appearance. It is a nuclear medicine test, so we are putting these babies through a nuclear medicine test. And they have to hang around most of the day, or half a day, because it takes a while before, once we've given the dye, for it to be absorbed by the kidneys. So it's not something I want to do lightly. It's a pretty grim machine, taking pictures above, and it's not a fun day out for children. Why do we do it? It shows us the amount of function between the two kidneys, because 100% of the dye will be taken up. If both kidneys are working equally, it'll be 50-50 each side. If there's scarring on one, the other will take up the dye instead, and you will get a different percentage. So you can see what the percentage difference is. And then you can also see the scarring. We also use it for position. Ultrasound is good, but you can find some kidneys in some odd places. We tell patients that they've got a single kidney and then find one really weirdly somewhere else. I wouldn't use it for pyelonephritis diagnosis, but you can. So it's that percentage of function. If you look at the top one, you can see that there's only a tiny amount being taken up by the left kidney. So it's only 8% compared to the right, which is taking up 92%. Doesn't tell you about the total kidney function, as in, the creatinine could still be really high, but it's just relative to each other. And as I said, that scarring looks like a moth-eaten thing. This is a patient who you can see over the years gradually lost kidney function, and you can see with scarring less and less, quite like that one. And then the MCUG, micturating cystourethrogram. This allows us to show a study of the flow of urine. It shows us the appearance of the bladder and how it fills and then how it empties. But it's a miserable scan. You have to catheterize the child and inject a dye and then do X-rays. So it's not something I want to do lightly, and we never do it on children under the age of, over the age of 1. It's just not a nice scan. As the bladder contracts, you can see where the dye goes. In an ideal world, it goes straight out the urethra. Unfortunately, you can get reflux back up to the kidneys. That's showing unilateral, and that one's showing bilateral. Do we care that you have reflux? Your answer is we care, but really only if you're having symptoms. If I was to go around and do this horrible test on lots and lots of people will have reflux, but no symptoms, and that's fine. You're not actually damaging kidneys or anything like that unless you are getting infections. And the problem with this is if you're getting infections and you're not treated within 48 hours, you are going to get scarring. So we need to deal with this, but only if you are symptomatic. Reflux on its own is not a problem. We have to have antibiotic cover in case, because we're only doing it on children where we're assuming there's reflux, and it has to start the morning before the exam. Most of these children are on prophylaxis, and they can use the prophylaxis and increase the dosing. I've done tables for them in our patient leaflet letter for that, and they complete 3 full days of the antibiotic before reverting back to their prophylactics. And then finally, we have a MAG3, which used to be known as the LASIK scan. So we've had the ultrasound shows you the imaging, the DMSA shows you the function percentage and the scarring, and the MCUG shows you lower flow. The MAG3 is also a nuclear medicine radioisotope scan. I'm not even going to say the words. That's too hard. That's why we call them DMSAs and MAG3s. And they are looking at the upper flow, so the drainage of the kidneys and the ureters into the bladder. Again, we put a cannula in, we stick a dye in that's just taken up by the kidneys, and we watch that dye after certain amounts of time as it goes through in the urine, so that we can get these curves which show us how well that it is draining from the kidneys. So this is a little bit like a DMSA in that we can see scarring from it because the kidneys take up the dye, and we can look for areas where there's no uptake, and it gives us the flow through. So you can also add to it an indirect cystogram, which means you can see the images of the bladder as it empties. So kids don't like this because they have to pee on command in front of a radiographer, in front of a great big machine. But it does allow us to look at bladder emptying as well. So it's like adding an MCUG. But there is always a catch, and that is that it can only be done on children who can control their bladders. So little ones can't have that, and that's why we have to do an MCUG on the little ones, even though it's horrible. So my plea to you guys is, let's work together. I don't want to be doing these investigations on children that it's kind of maybe, but we can't risk not doing them because, as I say, once you damage, that cannot be reversed. So if we have incomplete urine culture results, we have to make a clinical decision, to whether we progress down the route or not, which, as you see, is not a light decision to make because we're putting kids through quite a lot. So the all-important sampling is the main thing, and my plea to just email us and let us know any positive results. I log them on the system every time so that when I see them in clinic, I know what I'm dealing with. So yeah, any questions?
There was only one question. First line antibiotic for UTI.
So every area has its own. So usually we're using amoxicillin as our first for children. But then it can change with sensitivities. So start with amox. Trimethoprim isn't good enough anymore. For prophylaxis, we're using trimethoprim. It's 1 milligram per kilo at night, and it goes up obviously with weight, which is always a big deal. And I'm very grateful for you guys for doing that. And then should we be having increased, recurrent infections, we need to tailor it accordingly. And it usually ends up as nitrofurantoin, which is hugely expensive. So not done lightly, but as I say, we will tailor it according to our, what sensitivities. But again, in clinic, I need those sensitivities to make those decisions. And, those are really being done in primary care. So I'm really grateful to you guys if you make sure I get those results. Makes our life much easier. Treatment length, it's 3 days. So again, our NICE guideline audit that we did recently showed that we weren't brilliant at that, and we all have an innate feeling that we need to give them more, but actually it is only 3 days of antibiotics, which is why you're unlikely to get results before they've nearly completed their antibiotic course. So we used to say it's fine, start antibiotics and then call them to stop the antibiotics once if you've got a negative culture. Nowadays, they just tend to get 3 days of antibiotics, and that's fine. Better that than losing 3% of kidney function for the rest of their lives. And that's why there's the strict criteria of the DIP result and what you should start. I can see. So you can refer to, so the next question, this question about referral to general peds for recurrent UTIs. What are your criteria for referral for specialist interest clinics? And can be seen in together clinics if recurrent? They can, absolutely. So the reason is general peds is they will get triaged to me essentially because I run the kidney stuff. So, but I'm a general pediatrician and it's in my general pediatric clinic, which is rapidly becoming a renal clinic. I also do a clinic once a month with Dr. Sinha, the renal specialist from the Evelina. So I wouldn't refer to a specialist interest clinic. Refer to me first. And if I can't handle it, I will discuss it with Dr. Sinha. And if he can't handle it, we will refer it on. So I would do that if I were you. As for the other clinics, as I'm sure you've noticed, we're a fairly tight bunch of pediatric general consultants. We all get on very well, and we all share offices very close to each other. If anyone, they can absolutely be seen in together clinics. And if they have any questions or anything like that, or there's anything more complicated, whoever your consultant is will come and talk to me, and I'll happily see if needed, but I'm pretty sure they can manage it. In boys, is the course longer? Nope, the course is absolutely the same in boys as it is in girls. And unlike in the adult population, you do get, you don't have an increase of UTIs in girls that you do in boys as compared to boys. You do actually have more in boys because they're much more likely to get the PUJs and the PUVs. What is the email to flag? Okay, so the email, someone's asked me what the email is to flag up. I've put it on here. You can always just ring any of the pediatric secretaries if you can't remember this. The email is also on the leaflet, prevention advice leaflet, but it's children's.secretaryc@stgeorges.nhs.uk. So, you know, as I say, you guys want these patients sorted. You don't like them coming to you all the time with urinary tract infections and all the rest of it. And we all want the right treatment, but it's very, very difficult in clinic when you're just facing a parent who goes, oh no, they've got a urine infection all the time. You know, every couple of weeks we have to go back. And it's very hard when actually that could just be vulvovaginitis that's been treated multiple times with antibiotics, or it could just be abdominal pains that are being treated, which is understandable because, you know, you dip urine, you often get nitrates or, you know, leukocytes, weird things. Or and if the child's unwell, you're going to start antibiotics. But I need that culture result to know what is the right thing to do for that child. Any other questions?
Maya, can I ask a question?
Of course you can. You can always ask a question.
In regard to the answer to the last question, do you mean that, do you want a GP really to email you to flag up abnormal urine results? I assume we as the general pediatric team should not do that really, because GP should be able to manage these patients and then refer to you or to us if things are going out of their hands, right?
Not with if you've got a child with recurrent urinary tract infections, meaning they're under a consultant at the hospital. So no, I don't want every single abnormal urine result being sent to me. What I want is, and the reason I put the children's secretary C there, is if a child is under a peds consultant at St. George's for urinary tract infections, that consultant needs to know, because often they're not on our system. In fact, they're rarely on our system. That consultant needs to know what urine infections that child has had since they last saw them, because that affects the choice of investigation, the choice of management. You know, it affects massively what we do. And very often we're dealing with incomplete evidence. And as I say, the one I told you, this child who dad told me about 3 antibiotics in six months or less, all at Croydon. So I rang Croydon and the child hadn't had any urinary tract infections yet. We were about to go down a very difficult route of investigation for that child. So it makes a big difference. And people, we don't want to miss stuff. So I don't want to be going, oh, well, we're not going to investigate that child because they haven't had, infections that we know about as well, because, scarring is permanent. There is nothing we can do about it. So we need to know. It changes our management. So yeah, if you've got a child under you with recurrent urinary tract infections, you need to be emailed the urine results. You just store, you don't even have to do much. Children's secretaries will just upload it onto iClip so that when you see them in clinic, you know what they've had. Does that make sense? Gone very quiet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that makes sense.
I don't
see any more questions from anybody else.
So can you see MSU results on Cerner when you see them on clinic? Your answer is it depends where it was done. So most often if it's been done at the GP surgery and where your urines get sent to for processing. So most often not. Occasionally I can see some of them, but usually no. And that's my problem. That's what I'm saying. I'm often dealing with incomplete information, but making quite big decisions for that with that information. So that's why we need to work together, if that's okay. Right. Any other questions or anything? I've got 4 minutes.
Maya, could I add?
Yeah.
I don't know, my hand doesn't raise. I'm very sorry for
I
some
can't
reasons. It's
hear it.
Mayana, one of the pediatric consultants.
Hi.
The parents actually, so most GP practice now send it to the NHS app. So if you can't email it, I would say that the GPs just send it to the patient and they can also show you. That has been very helpful with some patients. I don't know, it's not
Say with some
everybody
patients that would be
who
great.
joins. Yeah, it doesn't, not everybody I think gets it yet.
They don't. And the majority of times where I have patients where I'm most uncertain of what they're saying, of course, there's a lot of language barrier and as a result, understanding difficulties. So they'll say, yes, the child's had antibiotics 3 times, and you'll go for urine and they'll just go, yes, kind of thing. And it isn't always the correct thing. So, yeah. So, but that's a good thought. I hadn't thought of that. I will do that. But the other plea I have is to do, as I say, with the NICE guidelines. Every child who's diagnosed with a UTI, even the first UTI, should be given prevention advice. And I'm going to be on the warpath, as we only did 20% adherence to that policy in my audit. And if you guys could do that as well. And as I say, there's a leaflet. All you have to do is hand them the leaflet. It's got everything on it. Okay, any last questions? You get to see our results. That's not fair. Someone said that they can see our MSU results from the hospital, but we can't see theirs. That doesn't seem right. Absolutely, the QR code. I think you go. I mean, it's on the St. George's website. The actual leaflet. Yeah, someone else asked for the QR. So there's the QR code. It is on the leaflet's on the St. George's website anyway, should you, the ones available for everybody. But obviously I find that quite useful, QR code. And I'm hoping to increase our adherence, as I hadn't, A&E weren't aware of the leaflet, so we should do better. So yeah, good sampling, lots of communication, and lots of information for parents. Oh, good idea. We're sharing slides. If you receive an E. coli culture but low WC, would you put that down to contamination? Your answer is yes, usually. So unless you have specific reasons to think that the child definitely had a urinary tract infection, like they were in retention, or there was evidence of poor flow, unless you have you can get some E. coli in the culture, but unless you've got unless you've got greater than 40 white blood cells, it's not a urine infection. It's probably just a contamination. And that's why we have quite strict criteria, because you're going to have to go down these quite difficult routes of investigation. So yeah. So there is some leeway, there is some clinical judgment. Again, that's where you guys come in, because you guys are the ones who will have seen the child first. And you can say this child was really sick and it really did seem like a urinary tract infection. They, they were passing, they were complaining of pain on passing urine. They were wetting them. If they're old enough, they were wetting themselves, all that kind of thing. They had fevers. And, we're talking white blood cells around 30 rather than 40. You take some clinical decision, but unless it's, oh no, they were a bit ill. We did a urine. It did show E. coli, but it wasn't up to 40, then no. Sorry, I'm just getting back into my phone to look at the messages. Not your province, but should adults have prevention advice? 100%, and an awful lot. I don't do adults, never did adults. I did 6 months as an F1 as a houseman, and that's it. So most of that information goes for adults as well. The big one for adults, of course, is passing urine after sex. And men should not be getting urinary tract infections. So I don't know about NICE guidelines for adult UTI, but it seems like it would be a very sensible thing to do. You know, I see kids up to 18, and, you know, I've got one in clinic recently who came yesterday, who, when she came to me, was wetting day and night. And when we looked into it, she wasn't drinking, and she was only peeing like twice a day, and you would not pee when she went to bed and things like that. By just giving her fluids, the advice, lots of fluids, and giving her a timetable, she is now fully continent both day and night. So yeah, adults as well, but maybe not my leaflet. They might not appreciate some of the kids' stuff on it. And as for the urine color charts, they were, wherever that has gone. No, that's the other way, sorry. The urine color charts work, you just Google it. I mean, you can have this one, it's, I just Google, it's the one I use, it's the one I like. They work for everybody. So I always tell parents to put it in a plastic folder and stick it on the back of the bathroom door, and the whole family can benefit for it. Current wait time referrals. One of the reasons I see you guys in my general clinic is because I don't know what our general current wait, I think it's like 12 weeks or something. The renal clinic is only once a month, and I have a 6-week wait for that. But if I need to, I will hold Dr. Sinna in before clinic early and shove people in the clinic. So we should see you just as the same. I'm a same as every other general pediatrician, but as I say, all my news tend to be renal, and as I say, I'm gradually becoming more and more of a renal kind of clinic. But so it shouldn't be too long. But in the meantime, you guys, there's no reason you can't request ultrasounds as needed, according to the NICE guidelines. Do those histories. Obviously, if there's anything in the history that is abnormal, such as mass flow problems, there's always the hot clinic as well. You know, kids shouldn't be having weird urine flow and abdominal masses. So that can, if there's something like that, we can either see them on Blue Sky or hot clinic. But for your standard referrals, I think it's 12 weeks at the moment. Yeah, someone said urine color chart is great to see if the doctors have enough fluid and breaks. Yeah, I sit in clinic for like 4 or 5 hours telling people to pee every 2 hours and think I haven't peed all day or drunk all day, but there you go, we're all hypocrites. Urinary incontinence, we have a team, a specialist team for that, that's run by nurses. They're great, the urology nurses. I don't have any nurses. They run a continence clinic. So the question was, do you see urinary incontinence such as 12-year-olds? We absolutely do, but there's a specialist clinic for it run by the nurses. So yes, but not by me.
Maya, could
Yes.
you give the email for the urinary incontinence out? Because very often I get asked by GPs about urinary incontinence, how they refer. Do you have that?
I don't have it on me now, because it's through it's the urology team that have those nurses. But you just do standard referral to the hospital and it will get triaged to them. But you just to the incontinence, just call it to the incontinence nurses. As I say, they run a specialist clinic.
Right, we're going to move to the next speaker.
Sorry.
Maya, if you stay around 4:30, you may have questions. So we're going to move. Thank you very much, Maya.
My pleasure. Let me just figure out share.
As always, thank you.
Yeah, I talk a lot.
Oh, that's a good thing. That's your strength. Let's use it.
Right, should be yours, the screen.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Melanie Wood. She's male.
Hello.
Welcome for this talk. Thank you very much for giving us your precious time. I think I'm going to let you introduce yourself, say who you are and what you do.
Okay, thanks, Giudoni. I'm Mel Wood. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist with the CAMHS Emergency Care Service. I've not come to one of these days before, so I've just put some slides together and hopefully they will cover things that are useful, but I've hopefully also left enough time for questions. And so please do use the chat and we can pause or redirect or as appropriate. Hopefully, has that come up?
Yeah, it's up.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So I was going to say a little bit just initially about some of the numbers that we're seeing nationally, and some of the things that are slightly concerning about children and young people's mental health, and speak a little bit about CAMHS crisis services generally and also what we're seeing locally. Briefly talk about local CAMHS services and where we tend to redirect people. And Giudoni mentioned that it would be useful to have an update on eating disorders. And then after that, really, whatever people would like to discuss. I've just realised that, of course, I can't actually see the questions, but I'll try and keep half an eye on questions. And you can always flag me down if I've stopped paying attention. So this is some of the stuff that you're probably aware of already from the national surveys of mental health in children and young people in England, that we've seen rates of mental health problems increase from 1 in 9 in 2017 to 1 in 6 in 2020. That's in the younger children, whereas in young people aged 17 to 19, we're seeing an increase from 1 in 10 to 1 in 6, and then again in 2022 to 1 in 4. We're also seeing that the CQC is concerned that children and young people's mental health services aren't expanding in line with the rise in demand, so that young people aren't necessarily being seen in a timely fashion, or there aren't the resources available for those who are presenting in crisis or severe mental health problems. So 2 years ago, Children's Commissioner was noting that waiting times had increased for the first time in 4 years, and that not everybody who had a mental health disorder was receiving treatment. And although the spending has increased, it's still a very small proportion of the national spending on mental health services, and only a fraction of the spending on adult mental health services. And in line with that, then there's also an increasing shortfall in secure children's home places. So that's putting a real pressure on children's services, and also means that we're often seeing a lot more young people in the acute trusts who haven't got anywhere else to go. In terms of the CAMHS provision to acute trusts, it's very variable across the country. We don't have a paediatric liaison service locally. We've got the CAMHS emergency care service, which will say a little bit more. And the provision is patchy across the country, with some places that being paediatric liaison and in reach to the wards, but other places just providing acute crisis assessments. And young people have been saying that they really think that there needs to be some more support to avoid things getting to a point where they're in crisis. And they're very much aware of the difficulty finding support, both at something tier 1 primary care level, but also community care and community CAMHS, and that the long waiting lists can be really challenging for young people, and A&E doesn't always feel like an appropriate place to get help. And I'll talk a little bit about the follow-up care for young people that we see in crisis. So again, this is sort of national issues. The CAMHS crisis services, like my team locally, are seeing an increasing number of referrals with increasing levels of risk and increasing complexity of mental health disorders. More young people presenting with police or under a 136, or presenting with challenging behaviour. And my paediatric colleagues at St George's can confirm that we're seeing increasing numbers of young people who are spending sort of considerable amounts of time on paediatric wards, while we either try and put a safe discharge plan in place or identify a psychiatric inpatient unit. The waiting times for tier 3 and tier 2 CAMHS services also have an impact on how we support young people who are presenting in crisis. And children's social care are struggling to provide as much input as they used to. And then I think the last few factors are probably also impacting the general practice. A lot of young people who are still struggling to attend school. Cost of living crisis is really impacting on family resilience, and crisis services, like all other aspects of the NHS, are struggling with staff sickness and burnout and high turnover. So these are just some brief figures about my team locally, which is a nurse-led crisis assessment team that works 7 days a week. We don't work for 24 hours a day outside of 8 p.m. to 9 a.m. And CAMS cover is provided by the on-call psychiatrists and by the adult liaison teams. And my role is fairly new. So we've had previously then psychiatry support to the crisis team was provided on a sort of rota basis by the community CAMS teams, which could often mean additional delay in young people being seen. And as you can see, then the big leap in our referrals was really from 2020 to 2021, and it's remained about static since then. Anything, questions about any of that before I sort of like move on to where we're redirecting people to, if you like, from me? The assessments that we do when we see young people in A&E, we're most likely to discharge people home, like back to the GP, to Tier 2 services. We might discuss them with Tier 3 CAMS community teams. So in some ways we parallel the CAMS SPA and access services, and we'll sometimes see that if you've referred somebody to a SPA and then the young person comes into A&E, then the SPA will often close that referral on the basis that the young person's being seen through my service, and that therefore there's no need to duplicate the assessment. Anybody who's seen through A&E will have a 7-day follow-up, either with my team if they're not already known to Tier 3 community CAMS teams, or through their own service. And even then it can feel like we're perhaps duplicating assessments and asking young people too many questions without them necessarily feeling that they're getting any actual therapeutic benefit from their conversations with us. What we generally do, the initial assessment will be a mental state assessment and a mental state examination to try and make a diagnosis, or at least a formulation of what problems the young people are presenting with, alongside a risk assessment and a sort of formulation of what's triggering their difficulties, what's keeping their difficulties going, and have an initial guess at what sort of support they might need going forward. And then at the follow-up appointment within the next 7 days, then we're looking to see how review their mental state, see if the crisis is settling, but also to see whether there's anything that we've missed in the context of the acute crisis, and then make a definite decision about what help they might need going forward, and to then make that referral onward, or that signposting. And a lot of services are moving away from the tier model and are using the Thrive framework, which in some ways it's a redescription of what we're already doing, but it's quite a helpful way of breaking things down for young people. So we'll see young people who have had a wobble, who don't need ongoing input from services, who might just need some advice and signposting. They're very much in that green getting advice corner. And the people that will refer on to either Tier 2 services or Tier 3 services are often those who need the more focused, goals-based input in the getting help. So we're thinking perhaps of CBT model. And they're often the young people who are pretty much coping. The getting more help are often the young people with more complex needs who perhaps aren't managing to attend school, or already getting support from Tier 3 CAMS, but are struggling despite that. And the group who need risk support overlap a little bit with the young people who are getting help and getting more help, because they might need just risk support briefly, or it may be that young people may need a period where the main support and input is around managing risk, which might even be admission into inpatient services for a period. So locally, and I'm going to run through this quite quickly because I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. We have tier 2 services which vary across the 5 boroughs. So like locally in Wandsworth, there's the Well Centre. Other boroughs, there's Off the Record. There's mental health support teams in a lot of schools across the boroughs. And for young people who have a social worker, then CAMS in social care teams can work with young people at tier 2 level. There's the tier 3 community CAMS teams in each borough. And then across the 5 boroughs, we have the neurodevelopmental assessment team, dialectical behavioural therapy service. And there's also the CAMS emergency care service, not the CAMS emergency care service, that's my team, the CAMS eating disorders team, which I should have added to the list. I'll talk about them later. There's also the CAMS LD service, which is slightly more complicated. That works across some of the boroughs, but not all of them. And then for young people where we're worried that they might need an inpatient admission, we may refer them to the adolescent outreach team. And community CAMS teams can provide psychological input, often CBT or individual therapy or family therapy, as well as psychiatry assessments and medication. And I'm not going to talk about ADHD today because I think Serena talked about ADHD earlier in detail and covered the way that CAMS and St George's services overlap. But the psychiatry input in community CAMS teams, aside from ADHD, is often around prescribing, but also about risk management and consultation to the rest of the team. And for community CAMS teams, usually the maximum that they'd be able to input it for a young person would be up to seeing them up to once a week, whereas the adolescent outreach team can provide more intensive support, and they do have the option of visiting young people at home, and they're also really experienced at working with young people who are presenting crisis for a longer period of time and need more extensive risk support. Beyond that, if the adolescent outreach team isn't able to manage the risk safely in the community, then we're looking at an inpatient admission, either to a general and adolescent unit or an eating disorder unit, or for young people who are presenting with really challenging behaviour or are really acutely disturbed, in a psychiatric intensive care unit. We can also access the South London partnership services, such as the ones for young people with complex autism and neurodevelopmental disorders at the Maudsley. You also have an at-risk and forensic service and the National OCD service, as well as FCAMS. So the vast majority of young people that we see through A&E, we will be referring back to those tier 2 services and tier 3 services, however. Is there anything that would be useful to discuss? Well, I can see question about the cause of the rise of mental health problems. It's generally one of those annoying answers that it's multifactorial. The lockdowns definitely had a huge impact on young people. The loss of schedules, the loss of activities, the loss of school, and also the fact that school is now optional. It wasn't something that you had to do. And also the amount of pressure on schools itself, so that schools were also seeing greatly increased levels of stress amongst their teachers. So school was less of a containing and supporting area for young people who would otherwise have found a lot of their stability in school. So that's one factor. There's been so much confusion in world politics and events as well over the last couple of years. There's ongoing investigations into the impact of social media, for good or bad, for young people. And then there's the feedback loops, that the more stress families are under, then the more stress vulnerable young people are under. And those young people who have neurodevelopmental disorders or learning difficulties or learning disabilities are at increased risk, and all of those risks can interact. So I don't think anyone's been able to tease those all apart and sort of like statistically analyze quite which ones contribute, but it isn't very much a national thing. And the other thing to add, just about thinking about social media, is there are some things that we're seeing almost like a contagion, in the same way that in small communities, then mental health issues can spread as if they were infectious. And during lockdown, then there was the massive increase in functional tic disorders, which seem to be very much spread by social media. So it's very easy for patterns of ways of showing distress to spread through social media. So that's probably enough about mental health problems. Marianne, referrals, the main point of access for different teams is through the local SPAs. So the single point of access, there's one for Kingston and Richmond. For Wandsworth, it's the Wandsworth Access team. And for Merton and Sutton, then again, there's a SPA. And those single points of access will redirect referrals to either Tier 2, Tier 3, CAMHS in social care, or to the neurodevelopmental assessment team. There's sort of like some internal systems where things, referrals find their way around. You can refer directly to the eating disorders team, and they can respond directly to that, or they can redirect the referral to the Tier 3 team. Some of the more specialist teams, then the referrals have to be from within CAMHS, and like the DBT service, the referrals generally come from within CAMHS, that it's young people who are already known to our services and just have had some input and haven't been doing so well. Similarly, you can't generally refer directly to the outreach team or for an inpatient unit. And the route for that, if for a young person in crisis, as you usually do, would be to refer people to A&E. All of the community candidates teams have a duty person that you can speak to. Sometimes our telephone systems aren't great and it can take a little while to get a call back, but generally the duty person will call you back. So if you're ever not sure of which direction to refer people, then do please call us up, because it's helpful to discuss these things. I'm going to come on to talking about eating disorders. I think the reason Dudoni asked me to speak about this was that during lockdown, there was that huge increase in a number of young people presenting with acutely disordered eating. And Freddie here at St George's had a large number of people admitted for long periods of time with disordered eating and acute food refusal. The referrals to the community eating disorders team massively increased and really affected thresholds and waiting lists. That has very much changed though, and the referrals numbers have dropped probably pretty much back to pre-COVID levels. What we are seeing is more young people who we would describe as having disordered eating rather than an eating disorder. So they're not necessarily presenting with classical focus on weight loss, that they're food restriction, maybe within the context of self-harm or emotional dysregulation, or even with suicidal thinking. However, this isn't something that we need you to think about and sort of like make a diagnosis or a decision about what seems to be driving the disordered eating for any particular young person. The eating disorders team would much prefer that you just discuss or refer to anybody that you're concerned about. They don't currently have a waiting list at all. They discuss referrals daily. Routine referrals who are accepted will be seen within 4 weeks, and urgent referrals will be seen within a week. And that's the only one for which there's a specific criteria that anyone who's been losing 1 kilo of weight a week for more than 2 weeks would be considered urgent. Once somebody's been seen and assessed, if they're accepted and it's felt that the team can provide something useful support, then they'd start therapy immediately. And if it was felt that Tier 3 community general CAMHS input was more appropriate, then that referral would be redirected. It wouldn't be referred back to the GP to re-refer. So the key things, the one key thing is that the young person and their family are consenting to the referral. But beyond that, then it's really helpful to have seen them face to face. A lot of young people, the worry will come from their parent, perhaps with a telephone consultation, but we really need to ideally have a weight and height, and in an ideal world, so a previous weight and height. And if you're seeing them face to face, then it's additionally helpful to look at their physical health more generally, at least a postural blood pressure and heart rate, make a note of any dizziness. And if you can get any sense of what they're usually eating, then that would be really helpful. Before young people have been seen for that initial assessment, then the advice would usually be to redirect people to A&E if you've got any acute concerns about their physical health when you're examining them, or if they've not eaten for 48 hours, or they haven't drunk any liquid for 24 hours. And that was my eating disorders update, courtesy of the eating disorders team. Any questions about any of that?
There seem to be no question. There was a question from Marianne.
Yeah, that seems to be that.
Yeah.
And it's nearly 4 o'clock. I was just going to note, as I said before, then we've been seeing more young people and families where there's some really quite complex psychosocial issues, particularly looked after young people, that group of young people who aren't in education or employment or training and struggle to attend appointments. Young people where there isn't a clear diagnosis of a mental health disorder, but there's a very definite history of trauma, possibly with neurodevelopmental disorder, and they're presenting with very challenging behaviours, or what we could call a mixed emotional and conduct disorder. And then the only thing I was going to add was that aside from CAMHS, and you're probably aware of most of these things, school pastoral support and SEN teams, early help and social care, and those local authority services such as the Wandsworth Autism Advisory Service. Then there are those national services like NCATS that work with young people who've got damaging sexual behaviours, who are really helpful. And then we've got the Dynamic Support Register, the Autism and Learning Disability Key Worker Service, and care, education and treatment reviews for young people with autism or learning disabilities that can provide an awful lot of support, particularly for those young people who can fall between the gaps between children's services and young people with mental health issues. And that was where I was pausing and just going to then say, has anybody got any questions? But I can see that Jane has said asked about blood tests for eating disorders. You don't need to do blood tests before you refer. And in fact, if you're concerned, then you can just call and have an initial discussion without having seen the young person, just on the basis of a telephone conversation. If you can do blood tests, then that's great. But the key thing is consent. And it would be great if you could see people and have a height and weight. I think blood tests would be considered to be down to your clinical judgment, having seen them. And I suppose then, if there aren't any other questions about today, then thinking ahead, are there any areas around children's mental health that you'd like us to consider for future teaching sessions?
Yeah, that's a good question. If we could get a reply about that, that would be great.
And you can also add that into the feedback forms. There's a question relating to future topics. So if you think of things later, please do add them to the feedback forms.
Yeah.
That sounds like we are done.
Well, thank you very much. You're done, definitely. That was amazing. If you could share with us a slide, then we can
send them to Vicky, but only about a quarter of an hour before I joined. So you should have them.
Yeah, we'll let you know any questions specific to mental health. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so I think next one is Emma. Emma.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I've got that really bright light on behind me, which is rubbish, isn't it? Hang on, let me turn around. Sorry. Okay, everyone gets to see my living room. Okay, hang on. Let me try and do something whizzy with Teams. That's not it, is it? Hang on. There we go.
Liking the color.
I can't even work out how to blur it.
That's better.
Oh no, that's not it. Hang on.
Oh, your living room's lovely. You can leave it up.
Sorry. Right, hang on. Let me try and I'm so bad at Teams. Hang on. Now I've lost it. Where's it gone? There it is. God, sorry. I am a competent doctor. Right. Right. That's what I want, I think. PowerPoint live. I don't know what I've just done. Hopefully this is going to come up. Right.
Yes,
there it is.
Can we now, has that come up as a slideshow or?
Yeah, the first slide is there with your name.
Okay, right. Okay, let's see what happens. Sorry. All right, hello everybody. Good afternoon. I know it's 4 o'clock on a Friday and this is about paediatric oncology, but I'll try and keep this upbeat and talk a lot in half an hour. So my name's Emma Sage. I'm one of the paediatric consultants at St George's, and I'm also the paediatric oncology shared care lead or POSCU lead. And this is a really, I hate the word passionate, but I am absolutely passionate about making care better for these kids. So I should try and shoot through these slides. That's the gold ribbon for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which is every September. I'm sure that most people are aware of childhood cancer, but there you go. So what I'm going to talk today a little bit, race through in half an hour, is a little bit of the context about childhood cancers and how that's different slightly in primary and secondary care. A little bit of clinical information about cancers and diagnosis and things that kind of the red flags, the things that we kind of all look out for, and then some case studies to try and make, which are real life case studies to sort of bring things to life a little bit. So how common is childhood cancer? For me, obviously, it seems super common because it's what I deal with a lot of my time, but actually it depends on the context, doesn't it? Every year, nationally, 1,600 children under 14 and 2,200 children between 15 and 24, which is when the CYP technically ends, are diagnosed with cancer. That's the equivalent of one classroom of children per week, which is why that picture is there. And the incidence has increased by 13% from when I was a kid to the early 2000s, and actually that was 20 years ago, so it'll have increased even more. I don't know what the figure is. Survival, however, is much, much better, which is great. Kind of aggregate survival rate now is kind of 80%. That's kind of much, much higher in some cancers. Retinoblastomas, even some of the leukemias now, our survival rates are 95%. It's pulled down by some of the rarer cancers, which are harder to treat. But it's true that survival in the UK is worse than in Europe. We're not quite sure why that is. There's a few things about access to scanning and resources, but it's still not entirely clear. They're all treated on the same protocols. But what we do know is that there's a high morbidity, long and short term, not just physically, but also psychologically. So why is diagnosis, I'm going to talk mainly about diagnosis today rather than treatment. Why is it difficult? Well, you know, it's the iceberg effect. There's this, my dad, before he retired, was a GP, and he said I think he'd seen 5 cases in his entire 40-year career of childhood cancer. Children are roughly, I guess, about 25% of primary care workload. And so that is about 1 case every 5 to 10 years if you look statistically. But if you switch that around the other way, if you're a young person, the risk of cancer actually is comparable to type 1 diabetes or epilepsy or bacterial meningitis. So that's rarer, but not as kind of what you think is rarer. The other really difficult thing is that cancers, especially in children, can present with really non-specific symptoms, which completely mimic common childhood conditions, and it's tricky. There's a great charity called Young Lives versus Cancer, which used to be called Click Sargent. They did a study in 2016 which found that nearly 60% of children and young people had consulted their GP 3 times with symptoms prior to their diagnosis, 30% up to 5 times, which really surprised me, actually. Why else is it difficult? Well, diagnostic pathways, they're not the same as in adults, which I know is, you know, the majority of primary care. Some things are emergency in children. Leukemia certainly is. It's not necessarily such an emergency in adults, although it can be. I understand. I haven't done adult medicine for a very long time. And actually, often recurrent presentations with symptoms is appropriate, and it can be, you know, it can be part of the diagnostic pathway. What's the effect of this delay, or whether it's real or perceived, on diagnosis? Survival rates, possibly. I think you could probably argue some of that's definitely not as clear cut as in adults. But I think probably what I hear a lot of, and what definitely is backed up by the studies, is the relationship of trust between healthcare professionals with delayed diagnoses. I say that perceived or real, and that's not just between primary care and patients, it's also between secondary care and patients. It works all the ways. Now, brilliantly, I can't even read my own slides because they're so far away. This was a study that was done, again, it's the Click Sargent study that was done in 2016 that spoke not only to young people but also to GPs to kind of think about why there were diagnosis barriers. And I think, as far as I can remember and from what I can read on my tiny slides, that it was, I think the majority, or the largest problem was training available. I don't know if that mimics anything that kind of you guys feel. I think a lack of awareness is quite interesting, because I think my experience is people are very aware, but hopefully some of this will, I'm happy to do training always about cancer. So looking quickly at childhood cancer as an overview, we know this slide is out of date now because this only kind of goes up to 2010, but we know that the biggest group of childhood cancers are the leukemias, mainly acute lymphoblastic leukemia, but also acute myeloid leukemia. And there is a small population with chronic myeloid leukemia. And interestingly, I've had 4 maybe new chronic myeloid leukemias in teenagers, and they've all been asylum seekers. And I don't know why that is, but so it's not something you'd often think about on a health check for a newly arrived person in this country. But actually, that's how a lot of our chronic myeloid leukemia has come through locally recently. Brain tumours are the second biggest cause of childhood cancers, and actually the biggest cause of mortality. And then you have a reasonable amount of lymphomas, and then underneath that you've got all the much smaller, the much rarer kind of bony tumours and solid tumours. So I'm going to just try and go through some of these with a sort of a clinical perspective, sort of the signs and symptoms of the leukemias. I think this is probably the most straightforward ones. And these are the emergencies, which usually, we get sent straight to A&E very completely appropriately. Occasionally there's been a blood test done that then needs to come in, but actually usually it's it's a straightforward clinical indication. The signs and symptoms clinically are caused by bone marrow infiltration and you get effects caused by the 3 cell lines affected. So low HB causing anemia, very pale, lethargic children, as opposed to the absolutely wildly energetic children who have got iron deficiency anemia and run around with HBs of 40, but they're literally running around the departments. Anemia in leukemia is much more likely to present with quite severe lethargy. They can present with recurrent infections caused by neutropenia. The difficulty with that is that, as everyone knows, because we've all seen it recently, the number of viral infections has gone through the roof. I think there's definitely some sort of post-COVID rebound. And so working out what's normal and what's not normal is really tricky if you're just looking at infections. And then thrombocytopenia can cause these petechial rashes or bleeding, kind of gum bleeding, gum hypertrophy classically. The other thing that often is less obvious is bony limp and bony pain, causing limps, and it's persistent limps that we worry about. It's much more likely that a child who's limping has a transient synovitis or a musculoskeletal injury, but persistent limps caused by bone marrow infiltration can be a sign of leukemia. And then all the extramedullary spread causes other clinical symptoms. So you've got lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly. Now, hepatosplenomegaly, if you find it, is obviously abnormal. Lymphadenopathy is completely normal, again, in children who are having recurrent upper respiratory tract infections. So that's one of the reasons it's so tricky sometimes to diagnose this. If you've got a big mediastinal mass, this can cause tracheal compression and compression of the major airways, be coughing, difficulty with breathing. Again, I think that's slightly more clinically obvious. And boys can have testicular enlargement. Tends to be more with relapses, but can be primary presentation. And gingival hypertrophy and brushing when you bleeding when you brush your teeth is always the classic one that I was taught at medical school. Brain tumours. I've just put that up there because there are flipping hundreds of brain tumours, and they're all classified very complicatedly. That's the WHO classification. But actually, clinically, they present depending on where they are. So I always think that's a slightly odd picture, but just think about where a brain tumor is, what it could be causing pressure. So raised ICP causing headaches. Now, as you know, the vast majority of children with headaches do not have a brain tumor. And actually, if you look at the evidence, it's very rarely the presenting sign of a brain tumor, although it can be. But headaches with vomiting, headaches that are waking up at night. Obviously, if there's lots of pressure, you can have papilloedema and seizures. Depending where it is, kind of cerebellar, you can have gait disturbances, very bad ataxia. Also remember, brain tumours can present with spinal metastases or actually primarily in the spinal cord, and that can cause kind of the more kind of hard neurology symptoms. My best recommendation is, this is taken from an absolutely incredible charity called HeadSmart. They have an amazing website. They have an amazing, they kind of have cards that they give out. They have an amazing lot of kind of education, like bump is the wrong word, educational stuff that they will send it to anybody. It's a brilliant website, and it has really good things to look out for. It kind of goes by in terms of picking up brain tumours in children and young people, and those symptoms that vary slightly by age, depending, of course, on the developmental stage of the child. It's a fantastic charity and website, and I can't recommend it enough. The next commonest cause is paediatric lymphoma, commonest cause of cancer. That for scientific purposes is divided into both Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and within non-Hodgkin's there's subtypes. How does it present clinically? Generally with painless lymphadenopathy, and that it's much more insidious and over a longer time frame than leukemia, the lymphadenopathy. There's always a little bit of time when we're thinking about lymphadenopathy and lymphoma, less with leukemia, but often with lymphoma. In fact, I had a child recently who's just finished treatment who was only diagnosed about 18 months after the lymph node first appeared. as it was all thought to be EBV, but so there's a slightly different time frame with lymphoma. The classic B symptoms with the lymphadenopathy of weight loss, and it's significant weight loss, night sweats and fevers. If you've got kind of major mediastinal involvement, you get the compression of the SVC. So this presents with facial swelling or cough, especially difficulty lying down. And that can be, again, it's much more clinically obvious, but by the time it's there, you've lost some time. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the commonest one is Burkitt's lymphoma. That's the one that everyone tends to know about because it's can be secondary to EBV infection and can present in the nasopharynx. But actually, more commonly in this country, presents in the abdomen and can present with intussusception. And this is probably more for secondary care, but intussusception in younger children, in infants, is a sort of a, not say normal, but it's a straightforward condition. In older children, intussusception is often associated with the Burkitt's lymphoma. So it can be abdominal pain, masses in the nose, and with associated B symptoms. Then we've got all the extracranial solid tumours. So these are the abdominal ones, soft tissue and bony tumours. These are much less common, but actually these are the ones where we really struggle with survival rates and pickup rates. So in the abdomen, you can have neuroblastoma, Wilms, which is a renal tumour, or hepatoblastoma. There's some variation depending on the age of the child. And it kind of, once you start getting a bit older, they kind of veer into the more adult cancers. And really the signs basically clinically are where the primary tumours are, if there's any local infiltration, if there's any metastatic disease, and if they've got some associated metabolic disease. It's all kind of anatomical, really. So with neuroblastomas, depending on where they are, that will define the symptoms. This is a really, sorry, it's a really horrible picture, but it kind of illustrates the point really nicely. So the neuroblastomas can present, everyone kind of always remembers the bilateral black eyes, or at least I always did at medical school. But it can present with eye signs, hepatosplenomegaly, abdominal masses, but also hypertension. And if it's involving the kind of lower spinal cord, bladder dysfunction, bowel dysfunction, inability to walk. Clearly, if you've got a child who's younger and is not walking yet, that can, or is not even continent, that can be harder to find. Wilms tumours are the large kidney tumours. They are primarily abdominal masses, and they tend to be fairly straightforward because they present with big masses. However, often they can be very quick growing, and they often start very little but cause quite significant signs, so, or symptoms even. So constipation is the most common presenting clinical symptom. The masses can be painful or have no pain at all. If they're large, they can cause kind of gross hematuria and blood pressure, high blood pressure. So you've got your things kind of caused by the kidneys. And then if they're kind of metastasizing, you can have weight loss and anorexia. And then you have all the soft tissue tumors, which can occur basically anywhere in the body. You have soft tissue, muscles, fat, blood vessels, nerves. And again, how they present very much is where they are, but essentially lumps and bumps in children, unless it's a lymph node, which is clearly a reactive lymph node, we're not that keen on. We've recently diagnosed a young man with a Ewing sarcoma who presented with a very small lump on his chest wall. So those are the things that need looking at, but it's all basically anatomy again. The bony sarcomas, we really don't have great survival rates for these, and these are the ones where even with quick pickups, because just to the nature of the tumours, they can present in different places. But when they spread, lumps and bumps at the primary centre, and then when they spread, kind of more systemic effects. Okay, so I just wanted to go, sorry, I'm rattling through because I've only got half an hour. I just wanted to go through some of the common presentations. Are they cancer? Are they not? How do we make kind of pattern recognition and red flags? Headaches are things that I worry about as a paediatrician, because I don't ever want to miss a brain tumor. But it's thinking about just its patterns. And when we look back at children when they present with a cancer, there's always something that doesn't quite fit a pattern. And I guess that's the major point, is what I tell all the medical students as well. That's the major point. There's always something that doesn't quite fit the pattern. So headaches are really common. If you've got chronic headaches, has there been a change in that pattern? Is there any visual disturbance? Are there any signs of raised ICP? Is the child ataxic? I mean, kind of hard neurology is slightly more straightforward, actually. And headaches in children less than 6 is always a red flag, because children don't really tend to complain of headaches at less than 6. That's always a red flag for me. Fatigue is a really common symptom, especially at the moment, especially post-COVID. Lots of post-viral fatigue syndrome. Loads of post-viral fatigue after COVID. But again, it's what it's in association with. Is it appropriate for that age group? Are there any associated B symptoms? Have they had thyroid function tests? Unexplained weight loss coming with that, it starts to increase your suspicion levels, I suppose. Weight loss. We just talked about eating disorders. We've had huge numbers of children referred to eating disorders, and my colleagues laugh at me because I always check LDHs with people who are coming with weight loss, just in case there's a lymphoma going on. What's the documentation of weight loss? Is there an obvious eating disorder? Is there some thinking around that? And that can be hard to find out, actually, a lot. Are there any obvious associated features, sorts of persistent coughs? It might make you think, oh, is there something else going on here? And a clinical examination is really important, because it's about thinking, are there lymph nodes? Is there any hepatosplenomegaly? I was trying to think of things that can be done in a 10-minute consultation. Limping. Children limp all the time. We get lots and lots of referrals for limp. The most common cause of limp in children, depending on the age, of course, is a little bit of transient synovitis, reactive arthritis, again, because of the vast numbers of viral infections. That's really common at the moment. So is a limp has there been a limp that's persisted beyond the normal timescale of those things, so more than 2 weeks? Is there trauma? Is there no trauma? Is there a complete refusal to bear weight? Are there any growth lumps or growths around the joints? And is there any associated systemic features? For me, a teenager who's limping always raises my suspicion about sarcomas. I guess that's me, but it's just about putting it in a context. Recurrent infections. I mean, in young children, they say it's normal for 6 to 10 per year. I think it's probably more than that after COVID. I've got kids who are completely well who are having them a lot more than that. Or have children been recurrently admitted for IV antibiotics, sort of more serious infections? Are there any associated features such as weight loss or persisted recurrent documented fever, certainly without any obvious infective symptoms, and any associated symptoms such as bleeding, pallor, lethargy, or large lymph nodes? Constipation. We had a child who presented with acute constipation recently, who turned out to have a Wilms tumor. I think it's on all of our minds a little bit. And this is really tricky, because constipation is unbelievably, sometimes all my general pediatric clinics are just constipation and headaches, but it's really common, and trying to work out when it can be a sign of something more serious is difficult. I guess if the pain is out of proportion, would make me think twice. If there was any abdominal swelling or a mass. So fecal loading is common in the left lower quadrant, but certainly not on the right. And actually, even in the left lower quadrant, you have to be very sure it's feces. And has the child been given laxatives and has been taking them, and are they not responding to that? Would always raise a suspicion that there was something else driving constipation. Cervical lymphadenopathy, again, another really, really common presentation. I guess, where are the lymph nodes? Is there associated upper respiratory tract infections or inflammation? So we get, I see a lot of children, the dermatologists refer us, who've got really bad eczema on their head and have occipital lymph nodes. That's where that's come from. It's not necessarily anything other than reactive. And do they have any associated symptoms or length of symptoms? It's really difficult with lymph nodes, I think. We talk about the size of them, the length and the shape and the feel of them. Those things are important to kind of try and differentiate between them. Nice, soft, squishy, small lymph nodes that haven't been there for very long generally are okay. So in terms of thinking about how we can all try and get this better, I mean, I always work on gut instinct of either the patient, the parent, or the doctor, and there's a sort of a 3 strikes rule that my dad always told me about. Three presentations with the same thing is an automatic referral. I think the most important thing that I've learned is that if something doesn't fit a pattern for a common condition, don't try and make it fit. Realize that it doesn't and think about something else. there are some toolkits that are being provided. I know that there's also one that's been worked on by the Cancer Operational Delivery Network in South West London at the moment, but HeadSmart is brilliant, and the Royal College Paediatrics has kind of echoed that in a project called Child Cancer Smart, which can be found on their website, which kind of in a similar way sets out things to be worried about and when to refer. I guess my plea is that we have a hot phone at St George's that is held by a consultant 24 hours a day, and if there are worries about cancer, that consultant can be contacted to discuss it for urgent referrals. For what should I do? We're here. That's what we're here for, and that's what we, one of the reasons with the phone is we set that phone up. Advice and guidance. I guess we try very hard to answer those queries. It's difficult sometimes, but that we can also use that. I guess if you're worried that something urgently, then please just use the hot phone. There is a Pan London Cancer referral form. I'll talk about that in the session that we're going to do in about 4 minutes time on referrals, which the first thing it says at the top of that form is please discuss all referrals with the on-call paediatric consultant, and all I can do is reiterate that. Please discuss that with us. I'll talk about why that's really important in a minute, but please talk to us. We can triage and direct really easily, or just reassure. That's what we're here for. I was going to do some case studies, but we've only got about 5 minutes, so I guess I will see if I can make this work. Right, I can't actually read it because it's too small. That's not very helpful, is it? That's a bit, no, that's not very helpful. So I have shot myself in the foot by not being able to see my own slides. These are all real cases. I'll maybe just talk about 2 of them. It's a 6-year-old, previously fit and well, who presented with a 4-day history of not weight bearing on her left leg and some pain in her left fever. 3 weeks earlier, she'd fallen off a climbing frame when on holiday, had an MRI, which was normal post the accident, but it had been just a bit painful since, and then developed this pain. Oh God, where's it gone? Lost my slides. There we go. So that child was referred to Blue Sky and was via the hot phone and was seen by the consultant the following day. She really wasn't walking on her leg. She had a normal X-ray and normal bloods, but this wasn't normal, and so there was a plan to review her in 48 hours. The X-ray was then reported as showing an early SUFI, so she was referred to orthopedics, who did some more investigations. 1 week later, but I think the important thing is that she was kept under review. 1 week later, she came back with a fever, lots and lots of lymph nodes. Full blood count was still all normal. And the MRI showed something going on in a left acetabulum. The full blood count and the blood film were repeated again. So that's what the 3rd time. And they were still normal. But there was quite a high level of suspicion as to what this actually was going on in her leg. And so that was actually referred to the Marsden, who said, well, keep her under review and do some more bloods. I'm going backwards now. And she, 3 weeks after her first presentation, there were in fact blasts on her film, and so the diagnosis was leukemia. And actually that's actually one of Giordone's cases. But I think that the important thing about that is that sometimes leukemia is really blindingly obvious when you first see it, and sometimes it's not. And the important thing is that wasn't a delay. You can't diagnose blast until you have blast, but it's if that had come via primary care, kind of doing the repeat reviews and the repeat blood tests would have been entirely appropriate. But the importance was repeating them because it didn't fit the pattern of a transient synovitis. It didn't fit a pattern of a traumatic injury. I'll talk about this one because this is the one that always worries everybody. This is another one of my patients, previously fit and well 11-year-old with a very strong family history of migraines, had presented to his GP with a history of migraines, and that was self-reported for the last 6 months. Wasn't sleeping well and was kind of changing his mood. Now, he also, I think very obviously, has autistic spectrum disorder, so there was, it was difficult to work out what was going on with these mood changes. He may have been waking at night with the headaches. It's quite difficult to get a history from him. Wasn't vomiting, denied any visual loss, although mum said that he'd stopped playing his computer games recently, and she had assumed it was because he'd fallen out with his online friends. So he was referred to Hot Clinic and seen the following week. And actually during that, we were able to sort of, mum had been monitoring because the GP had said, please keep an eye on this. We need to know what's going on. And said he's definitely waking at night with headaches. And he said he'd stopped playing the computer as he couldn't see the screen. So for me, this is now always a massive red sign if a child stops playing on their computer. And actually he had an MRI the next day and he had a massive medulloblastoma. And I think the key with this case was knowing what teenagers do, and them not playing computers is a bad sign. But actually, the question afterwards was, were the migraines misdiagnosed? I don't think they were. The key was that the visual change, and it's. I think it's always a worry with headaches, but there were clear things that had changed from the migraine pattern. That was really what I wanted to say. I'll skip through these other cases. I'm fed up of hearing my voice now. Right. The other thing I just wanted to flag up really quickly was because this is the other bit of interaction at the other end of treatment that I end up having lots of emails about. When children have finished their chemotherapy, after 3 to 6 months after they finished, it's just changed. It used to be 6, it's now 3. We revaccinate them. There's a schedule which I try and send out with all my letters. It's not the world's easiest schedule to follow, I would say. It's written by the Childhood Cancer Leukemia Group, but there's quite a lot of things which to me look a bit confusing, and I get quite a lot of questions about it. If that's becoming a real problem, can people let me know so that I can try and work out how I can get that more obvious? It should be straightforward, but as you can see on the bottom of that, there's lots of little addendums and sort of things that might make things a little bit complicated. So if people can just let me know if those things are not clear, then I'm happy to try and make a better explanatory table, I guess. Okay, I shall stop now. Are there any questions? Is everyone still awake? I know it's Friday afternoon, I'm sorry.
But we're all for Emma.
I may have accidentally muted the chat, so I can't tell, but I don't think there are there?
There are no questions in the chat, and
Okay.
I can tell you for sure, since you started, nobody left.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm glad. I'll take that as a win.
They're still there. There is a question coming.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hang on. Should we be doing bloods?
That was from the last talk.
Oh, from the last talk.
Next one down.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Jane.
Do you mean standard chemo for leukemia or lymphoma? Do you mean about the post-vaccinations? Yes. Oh, no. Yes. Yes, it is the standard chemo. There's a slightly different one for post-bone marrow transplants, which, if anything, is more confusing. I don't know. To me, it just when you read it to start with, it looks like a really clear table, really obvious. And then I got some questions, and I looked at it and I was like, okay. It depends on the timings a little bit, but usually, well, okay. I mean, I'm happy if you want to email me. I'm happy to look at it, Jane. Don't want to give you the wrong advice. I'll put my email address on. Hang on. Ooh, she says. There you go. I don't know. I think it goes up to 18. I'm pretty sure it does. Yeah. Email me. That's perfect. Okay, great. Okay, now. Shall I just move on, Donne, to referral-y stuff?
Yeah, I think you move on, and then if there are questions from the last topic, they can be asked.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Right, hang on. Now we do this comedy thing where I try and share again. Hang on.
And we can help you if there are questions.
Okay. Right. So this isn't just me. This is the rest of the consultants who are on the team today. I'm as well as the POSCU lead and the general paediatric consultant, I'm also the acute care group lead. So I'm going to put that hat on now for this bit. And I've changed my diagram. That is the original drawing for our Blue Sky Centre logo, which was actually in a beautiful bit of serendipitous transition between talks. This was also done by one of my oncology patients. So
it's coming now.
It's coming now. So yeah, that was she's
We
very
don't
proud
see
of
it.
her. Can you not see
Emma,
it?
we don't see
Oh,
it. No.
well, that's a shame. It's on my screen. Hang on. Should I try it again? Let's oh, hang on, share. That would help.